All right. All right. Hello and welcome to the Greatest Matches Slowcast stream. I am Slappy Davis, and here with me is the author of the article,
All
Morning
right.
Track. All right.
Hello,
Hello and
hello. Yeah,
welcome
I'll
to the
throw the
great.
link in chat real quick. Here we go. And if you can't remember all that or don't even feel like clicking, it's spypartyfans.com/essays/greatest is a little shortcut to it. It's an essay I posted just a couple of weeks ago about, well, the greatest matches in Spy Party history, as determined by me at least. You can go ahead and make your own list, and I'll retweet it for you if anyone out there has one. But these are matches with great competitive stakes, great plays, a lot of history and import and highlights and all that stuff. And we're going to take some games from some of these matches today, what we think are pivotal games in some of these matches, talk about how they went down and how they might have gone down differently.
Indeed. So I don't know if there's anything that we want to start with beforehand, before we jump into these matches. One, I just kind of want to hear more about the article itself. Did writing this article bring back like a flood of specific memories because you were a caster on, I want to say, every single one of these that had a cast?
Well, I was in the very last one, and there were no casts at all back then, yes. But I was in a lot of them, and that's unfortunate because I wanted to get ones where other people were involved, but these are the ones I remembered. So I was asking people for ideas, too, because they're more likely to remember the ones they've casted, right? And I'm more likely to remember the ones I've casted. But also, I don't know, man. These TOs just keep asking me to cast finals and semifinals, and that gives me a disproportionate edge on being involved. But yes, it brought back so many memories. But it also didn't really need to. When I sat down to like make the initial list and I just sort of write down what comes into my head right away, and then I'll refine it later. And I realized that I'd been writing for about an hour when I thought to myself, "Oh, I better go look this up and find out what were the turning points." For example, I think it was the Pofke Turnip Boy match specifically. I thought, "Oh, I don't remember enough about that. I should go look some stuff up." And then I kind of sat back and thought, "I've been writing for an hour and I haven't looked up a single thing yet." Which I guess means these things are pretty imprinted on my mind. And I don't think there were any examples of me writing down anything that turned out to be wrong when I checked later either. So quite a bit of my memory, intellectually and emotionally, have been dedicated to some of these casts and some of these matches, and it really just flowed out because it's been, in my case, 8 years in the making.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I would imagine that as a caster, there's just a lot of things that are deeply imprinted on your mind, and that we could expect a follow-up article of the 10 worst mistakes I ever made in Spy Party that were just deeply there. Like, you could do it. You could probably give me that list from 1 to 10 right now if I needed to.
I mean, I could give you a lot of stuff right away. It'd be a little too painful to write, and I'd keep thinking of new ones. It'd be a pretty long list. What you are probably going to get, though, is an honorable mentions list. Something a little scaled down, not as elaborate as the essay, but there are 4 or 5 matches that just missed the cut, and I particularly want to do that because there are some really great players like Lazy Bear, for example, who are conspicuous in not being on this list. But I want you to know Lazy Bear had at least 2 matches that just missed the cut, so you guys can expect a little director's cut, my own Snyder cut version of the essay pretty soon.
Yeah, because I mean, it is hard with the kind of communal replays that we've all kind of remembered. Is that every once in a while there'll be matches that are extremely memorable, but they weren't at the same kind of like level of a long, drawn out, punchy match.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like also a lot of matches where you remember a specific game rather than a match. And
right.
Then you go back and you were like, oh, actually, that was a little bit more lopsided than I remember it being, but it being intense in the moment.
Right. And more to the point, it'll be that you go back and look at a lot of the wins, and a lot of them were very boring, right? It can be 8-8. It can be tied. It can be an important match. But the spy never did anything all that interesting. The sniper caught them on a white purloin or a clumsy bug almost every game, right? And it's a tense match, and it's exciting, and there's stakes, but it didn't exhibit a lot of skill for either player because it didn't have to. A lot of matches are like that, and I felt like that was actually the number one thing missing when I looked at a lot of the matches with high stakes that were close, is that the individual games were not as compelling. And that ultimately ended up being the biggest thing I used to pare the list down to size.
Yeah. Okay, well, I know that we're going to revisit a bunch of these concepts about why these matches were great in great detail as we kind of go through them. The other thing I guess we're going to have to kind of mention is the presence of Crazy Kaylee in these matches. So we are going to try to break up the Crazy Kaylee. There won't be just a lot of Crazy Kaylee matches in a row that we're going to do, but you're going to see him many times. And I don't know if you want to talk about kind of why you reason that happens so often.
Well, yeah, on the list there's 10 matches, and I didn't I didn't set out to make it 10. It wasn't a top 10, and they're not ranked either. But he's in 4 of them, and that's because one of the criteria was stakes, which means that players who've had competitive success are going to be disproportionately represented, and that's clearly true here. And I think 4 out of 10 sounds about right when you think about the whole history of the game, and certainly the fact that most of the competitive history is in the last few years where he's been around and doing well. So, but yes, you want a little variety in a cast like this too. So we're not going to do like a crazy Kaylee marathon. And there are several other players here who appear more than once too.
Yeah, and like you're saying, it's just I think that there's a lot to the really exciting finals, and then the other thing about Crazy Kaylee is he really brings out a lot in his competitors. People know that they need to train in order to beat him. They know that they need to focus all their leverage on a few really crazy plays in order to get something by his incredible sniper. So I think also it's one of those steel sharpens steel situations where
Yes.
you need to bring your best, and it's brought out some of the best that we've ever had when people have really gone after him.
Yeah, we joke that it feels like players and casters and viewers are rooting against him a lot, even though everybody likes Kaylee, as far as I can tell. But that's simply because he's a very good sniper, and therefore it is that much more exciting when someone beats him. That's the way it works, right? When you're really good, when someone knocks off the champ or beats the best or whatever, that is more exciting. So sometimes that's the case as well. Some of these games, some of these top memories are guys managing to get one by the best sniper out there, and that's the blessing and the curse of being so good at what you do.
All right. Well, then I think that we are basically ready to go. Is there something that we should start with? Any particular games that jump out as being a great thing to just hop into and set the tone for the rest of the stream?
I like the idea of starting with Blue Moon Magician first because I started the essay with it, and I think it's going to be new to most people because it wasn't cast at the time and just doesn't get talked about very much for some reason.
All right. Let me grab that replay. So we are we're gonna do the courtyard games, I believe, right?
Let me see. Well, I have 2 from you. One is pub, one is courtyard.
Yeah, I think I might have sent the wrong ones over. Just
That's
a second,
all right.
I can grab from.
I will grab the other courtyard game as well.
Yeah, I think I probably went by. So one of the things is when you have the date modified thing. Unfortunately, some of the copies of them are great. I should always go by the what's it called? The actual name of the file, which I think is the server time.
Yep. Well, if people want to follow along, here's the match URL. We're going to start with those 2 courtyard games right there. Spoiler alert, you can see the results too. But that's okay. We know the results of most of these.
That's true. And so actually, let's set the stage a little bit for this match. So up until this point, so this is the hazard match of, what is it, season 4?
Season 4, yeah. The first all post-Steam, all new art season.
Right, so this is season 4. These are the bottom 2 at the time Diamond players, both fantastic players, a really strong Diamond that season. And this was not cast because we, at the time, really didn't like casting that many hazard matches. It's just kind of a, the person that loses is gonna get knocked down. It never feels great, so we usually prioritized other matches. So this went unstreamed, even though it was, I would say, an exciting. People would be excited about the matchup, but because there's just going to be a lot of pain at the end of it, we kind of shied away from it.
Yeah, we did end up casting 2 hazard matches the following season, but the casting had expanded at that point. I think people, they got used to it over time, and at that point, the casting took such a leap forward in season 4 that it was fair to say people didn't really know what they were getting into. They didn't know how public it was going to be, so we were a little nicer and it was all a little smaller. But going into season 5, everyone understood from season 4, casting is a huge, huge part of this now. So I felt like that was fair warning, and we do it a little more often than we used to now. And we're still pretty gentle about it, of course, because it's a tough game. But you're right, it wasn't cast. We didn't do that as much back in the day. But I was watching it live at the time because I was new to Diamond and had rooting interests and all that stuff. And it's worth noting that Magician had struggled in season 3 and season 4, and Bloom kind of barely ended up in the hazard match. He lost a lot of close matches that year. He lost his first 2 matches that season, actually, 7-5, both, to KCM first and then to me second. And they were both very, very close matches, and he started 0-2 anyway, when he could have very easily started 2-0 with very few changes. So he was 5th in Diamond, but it was like a razor-thin margin, and you flip like one match and he would have been 3rd, right? It was this just big or maybe fourth, I think. It was just this big pile up in Diamond that season. It was ridiculous. So he was a pretty heavy favorite coming into this, but late season Magician has a penchant for turning it on, and that's what happened here. He was up 8-5 at one point in this match. So that's the situation.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me see if I can grab the context. So we're going to start with the first Courtyard game, which should be Magician as Spy as Papa Danger. Let me see if I can get the context. So we may be turning on the context for the players, but I might just be lazy and
it's okay. So if the scoreboard's not right, people, don't worry about it.
Right.
But this is Magician up 8-5, and Bloom wins the tiebreaker. So he hasn't won yet. Magician hasn't. He needs one win in the last. Oh no, sorry, he's up 7-5 going into this. 7-5 going into this. So he's actually in pretty good shape. Because we're going into Courtyard. It's Courtyard and then Terrace if it goes that far. He's up 7-5, and most of the match it's just been snipers and it's been timeouts. There have been very few spy wins at this point, but we've seen a couple spies get into countdown. 3 of the previous 4 games, spies got into countdown, and that's the first time all match. In the first 8 games, it didn't happen at all.
Yeah, they were both very at the top of their game at this point, and honestly, even the shots were before content were like at 1 mission, 2 missions. There was a shot at 0 missions done. They were completely on top of each other. So it was a bit of a rough start for both of them on the spy side, but that's a little bit to be imagined. Especially this was, I think, Bloom's final season. Bloom was particularly known for being able to catch etiquette. He was one of the strongest, if not the strongest, etiquette sniper at the time in the game, and it led to a lot of matches like this where you're gonna have the.
Well, not just strongest, I mean, almost the only one. It was like him and Belial were the only ones trying to do it with any regularity, and Bloom was obviously in Diamond. So he was basically the etiquette sniper. And I can tell you now, because he can't hurt me anymore, when I played him in Library, our first match ever, I deliberately made a point to not pick up a single book, because I was not at all confident that I was going to be able to do that right.
Yeah. It can be a bit rough. Okay, so let me jump in here. I think I might actually just hide the scoreboard. It's not behaving right.
Fair enough.
Okay, so
it's Magician, Kane, Courtyard, Spy.
Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. And at this point, do we know the score at this point? Sorry, you probably
7-5 Magician.
7-5 Magician.
And because Bloom has the tiebreak, because he's the higher finisher, Magician needs 9. Bloom only needs 8.
Okay, well, I'm ready to go when you are. I mean, we're going to be stopping and rewinding, so the synchronization doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. All right. 3, 2, 1, playing it. Now I'm gonna check here, but I think he had a really low AT rate this season. Magician did. It might have been season 5 though. Generally speaking, he's had one of the lower AT rates out of anyone in Diamond. Not that that's saying a lot. It doesn't take much to have one of the lower AT rates in Diamond, but he's always hovered around like 30s and 40%, and most of the players in Diamond, 40's like the floor for most of them.
Yeah, and actually, I'm gonna fast forward a bit through this game because nothing really happens here for the first parts of the game. We see some slow flirts because I want to get to the other parts of the game. Now I'm remembering what game this is. I'm gonna go to this moment where the first notable thing for me is that Magician goes for a statue visit right after Orange Sari, and Orange Sari starts picking up, and Orange Sari is going to completely envelop his ability to get the second inspect because her animations are so slow that he got there a decent amount after her, but as soon as she decides to get her second animation, it stops him entirely from being able to get that inspect, and so he still gets a highlight. So it's funny because the meta changed a little bit where people became a little bit more cognizant of number of inspects on Courtyard, but at the time I think it was mostly a highlight and forget kind of a mode for a lot of players. So it put him at 1 inspect and 85% flirt, and then he doesn't finish flirt until about 56 seconds in.
So
So
the highlight thing you mentioned is actually a really good point. Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut off your thought though if you're not finished.
no, 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 please do. Then I have something to add to it.
Right, so you're right. It's kind of a rote highlight thing because you can do one of two things. Sometimes on Courtyard, what I'll do is if I see two people with the statue at the same time, I will try to determine if I can be sure that one of them didn't get two inspects, right? Like they were there the entire time. The entire time they were there, someone else was at the other statue. If there's even like a half a second in there, it's hard to be confident and you have to credit them both with inspects. But if you are willing to pay attention there, you can maybe keep one of those highlights a neutral light instead. And that can be very valuable. But in the meantime, you're not looking at the ambassador, you're not counting fingerprints, you're not looking at the guest list, or you're trying to do all those things at the same time. So you kind of have to decide, right? If you can get those two highlights down to just one, or maybe even none by watching the statue timing really closely, that could be valuable, but there's other stuff you're not looking at in the meantime. And I gotta be honest, I don't really have a rule. It just kind of it depends on how the game feels like it's going.
Right. And so the thing I was going to bring up is I think this is a good time to start bringing in the tool. Do you want to set this up at all?
Okay, so what time are you at right now? You're at 55?
I'm at 55 seconds because I think that's one of the big moments. Although I'm going to be probably going to look at another stat real quick, but we're going to be going back and forth with the stats basically this whole game.
Okay, so you want to talk about where he is, how likely he is to win this game, and what he should do next, I assume, right?
Yes. So first of all, do you want to say what we're about to do?
Yes. Okay, so I've been working on this. This has been one of my dream projects, a nice what if, like when we have timeline data. I've always wondered about that. Like when we get timeline data, what kind of things could we do, right? Because it seems almost limitless. And almost immediately, I was actually talking to Hummus about this long before Calvin's tool. We were just talking about what if we had timeline data, and I was like just spitballing, just throwing out ideas. We could do this, we could do that. And Hummus said, "You know what would be cool?" And I guessed what he was talking about just based on that. I guessed what he was talking about. He was talking about something that they do for professional sports. If you go to a Major League Baseball scoreboard on ESPN.com, for example, or an NFL scoreboard, they won't just have the box score showing all the stats of what everyone did. They won't just have highlights. They won't just have the score and the game situation. They will very often now have a little chart to the side called the win probability chart. The win probability chart will say something like, okay, we have all the historical data on baseball games or football games. In this situation, this team wins this percentage of the time. So for example, if one team is up 7-0 and they have the ball and they're at this yard line, here's how often they win from that situation. And it'll be different. If it's 7-0 and they have the ball on this other yard line, it's different. If the other team has the ball, it's different. Same thing with baseball. If it's the 7th inning and they're up by 1 run, that's a lot better than being up 1 run in the 3rd inning. And once you have enough data, you can sort of draw that out. You can look for similar situations historically. So I thought to myself, once we have timeline data, why couldn't we do that with SpyParty? Why couldn't we try to predict the likelihood of a spy win based on historical data? So in this case, what we would do is we would plug in the time left on the clock, the number of missions done, any partial progress, whether or not the spy is high lit, low lit, or neutral lit, stuff like that. And we can see what percentage of those times the spy came out with a win in the end. And that is one of the things I've been working on this offseason, is a basic win probability calculator. Now, I want to say up front, this is very rough. This is not public yet. It's not going to be public for a bit, if it is anytime soon. And I do not vouch for these numbers entirely yet, because there are a lot of decisions to be made, right? You obviously can't say, well, we're going to look at games with exactly this setup, because if you limited it to games, for example, with exactly 55 seconds left, you wouldn't have that many games, and it wouldn't be a meaningful sample. So there's a little bit of a fudge factor in there. Right now, for example, it's any games with this amount of mission progress or better within 20 seconds either way. And that might change. It might go up, it might go down. It will get more specific the more data we have, because we're still dealing with tens of thousands of games here rather than hundreds of thousands. But we do have, in the database, 1.5 million rows of different game states corresponding to timeline events across a lot of different competitive events. So that's a pretty good starting point. But what I really need from all you guys now is to bear with me, because the numbers are going to be a little bit rough. But I need you guys to play a lot of competitive SpyParty that I can parse and add to this thing, because we need more data now, because our tools are dramatically outstripping the amount of data we have to use them on.
Indeed. So we're going to be referencing this a lot during this cast, but it is extremely exciting. And I guess the only follow-up question I have is, what are the implications for free will at this point?
Right. If enough, well, so what I like about this actually is that I don't think it's a problem. I don't think it's overpowered at all, because it's the exact same thing that we already have where the game is self-balancing, right? If bug is popular and bug seems to win a lot and people bug more as a result, then all the snipers know that's happening. So they watch bug closer, which means suddenly bug is less valuable, which makes purloin more valuable, and microfilm more valuable, and swap more valuable, and back and forth. The same way we've seen the meta flip 4 or 5 times since I started playing on the efficacy of banana bread splits, for example, right? So it's the exact same kind of thing. So I think if people see from this tool, oh, wow, it clearly seems better to do X, well, they're going to start doing X, and it's going to stop being so valuable. So this, I think, will self-balance like everything else.
Great, that's great. Just remember, there'll be when the tool eventually comes out, there'll be like this warning in the bottom not to face the tool in the other direction. Otherwise, you see what you're going to do in the future, and it becomes very uncomfortable for everybody.
Right, and if you search for this tool and the only game it gives you is your own game from the past, don't touch it or you'll both implode. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. Okay, so 55 seconds, right?
55 seconds.
I'm going to go 55 seconds. Seduce done. Partial inspects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to do that.
So the baseline win rate at the very beginning of the game for Courtyard in this database is 45% for spies, which has gone up and down, but that's for every single game in the database. Our baseline is 45%.
45%, right. And I'm not going to search just Courtyard because, again, we have sample size issues. So one thing I've done to get around that, because you don't get enough games sometimes with just one venue, is I've grouped 4 of 8s and 4 of 7s together. I've also grouped 5 of 8s together, and 3 of 6 and 3 of 7s together. And Balcony, of course, is its own thing entirely. Balcony is its own category. But if you want a slightly better sample size, sometimes you just do all 4 mission variants together. And that's what we're going to do to start here, but we can tweak it as we go. So you said 44% as a baseline for Courtyard?
45%, and what is it? We have Spy is high-lit with partial inspects, and
yes.
Done
55 seconds, Seduce done. Spy, if you do neutral light, you're only at 48%, but if you do highlight, 33%.
Right.
So the position Magician is in here, and again, this is give or take 20 seconds either way, which means it's going to break down a little bit at the end of games, which, as games get more and more specific, we're going to have fewer and fewer matches, but it does give you a general sense of pacing. In fact, we might end up releasing 2 versions of this, one which is measuring win probability, and the other which is measuring percentage of time they get to count down, because you might want to use it just to measure pace, right? Because that's how the casters talk about this. We talk about whether or not the spy is a big suspect, certainly, are they going to win, but we also just talk about it in terms of progress. How close are they to getting the mission win countdown? Are they going to run out of time? So it's just another way in which this is more art than science, because you could argue that that's what you really care about in some circumstances. You just want to know what percentage of the time the spy gets to count down with this level of progress, even if they have to be very aggressive about it. But we can see from this number, if it's even close to right, even if this is very rough, this seems pretty definitive. In this general scenario, on a 4-mission setup, the spy wins about a third of the time, which is a significantly lower percentage than we started the game with.
Right, and there's a huge difference between being high-lit and low-lit, which is one of the most fun things that we've kind of discovered as we go through this, is what a massive difference. Now, obviously, the highlight thing is kind of subjective. People highlight for different reasons. It's a proxy for how high up on the sniper suspicion list you are. It's going to be less valuable, as we know, for snipers that highlight fewer people. But just in general, if you were looking at this game, you had no idea who the players were, anything about the context, and you're just looking at it in a pool of games, this is the kind of percentage that it's trying to reflect. And so it is a huge difference. It's basically the difference almost between a 50-50 and a 1 in 3 on the highlight alone.
That has been the most fun thing I've discovered, absolutely, is that if you put in a certain mission and then you filter whether or not they're high-lit, neutral-lit, or low-lit, that makes a much bigger difference than I ever would have guessed. It really does. In fact, there are certain things, a lot of fun, where it'll be like, well, if you're high-lit and Purloin hasn't happened yet, not a big deal. If you're high-lit after Purloin has happened, it is, right? Things like that. Or if you get away with a hardtail and you're still neutral-lit, your win rate often skyrockets, and I think there'll be some games in here that will demonstrate that.
Oh yeah.
But to get back to the specific game, now that we've basically announced what this is, Magician is behind the curve. He is about 1 in 3 to win here historically, and that's significantly lower than he started with. So he's going to have to pull something out of his hat.
All right, so let's just go ahead and restart at 55 seconds and see how the rest of this game plays out. Starting in 3, 2, 1, playing it. So like you're saying, so one of the big problems is not only do we have a highlight for the partial inspects, but we also haven't finished inspects. And regardless of whether or not it adds additional suspicion, because going back to statues isn't all that extra suspicious, except for maybe you're worried about the swap. But, sorry, it's not all that additionally threatening. Right, so Bloom might not actually do it, but it just eats up time, and he needs to do other things, and so that's why I think it's particularly reflective that only having partial inspects, if you're still highlight, is a big problem.
Yeah, I think that's true, and the inspects do take a lot more time than people think. People understand that flirt takes a while. They don't always understand that actually inspects take a while too, because you can't rush through it.
Right. So we're getting down to like 10 seconds here. It looks like we might contact, we might not. I think actually no. We're gonna actually bail to the windows. So here's something fun I want to do. So I want to look at like right before we do this time ad. So we hit a green time ad, and so I'm gonna go back and let's check the tool for what kind of win rates. Although I guess I should say some
1
of the
second
time,
left on the clock. You're saying?
Yeah. Actually, so one of the things about sample sizes now is every once in a while, if you find a really unique game, all of a sudden it's gonna either be 0 or 100% because it's gonna find the game that you're talking about. So so maybe I actually just I'm trying to think of like how we could get like a generic...
in this case it's okay. 1 second left on the clock. You still get 15 games with the same amount of progress here. Which is probably, I wonder how many of those end 1 second after this check.
Right.
Because they end up or because of a desperation time ad or something like that. But I will say that one other thing we're going to consider doing, by the way, is that if you don't get enough results because your criteria are too narrow or too specific, we might expand it on the fly, right, to try to give you more useful data rather than no data. We haven't decided yet. There's going to be a lot of feeling this out, right? A lot of iteration. It's very, very nascent. We're just having fun with it to start. But yeah, if you start with 1 second, Seduce is done, partial inspects on any 4 of 7 or 4 of 8, you still get 15 games, and you're a little south of 27%.
Gotcha. Okay, so the thing about I think a lot about this tool is I know that this is kind of maybe a peek behind the curtain that is kind of not disappointing, but kind of makes us step back a bit. Is the Spy actually like it very infrequently goes above 90%, below 10%. Like it's just stuff happens in SpyParty that really the confidence intervals for SpyParty are a little bit shallower on both ends than you kind of think, because in the moment when you're looking at this before he's got no banana bread at like 10 seconds left, and he decides to bail instead of going for the banana bread, because I think actually that's really wise, by the way. I want to talk about that decision real quick. I think he correctly decides to go add time, because if he banana breads and then goes and adds time, he's all of a sudden, like, you might get distraction from the banana bread, but you might get a white banana bread and not have time to add time.
Right.
So actually, I thought this decision was fantastic, just because if you are that far behind, you actually have to do something like this.
Yes, it is actually, I think, the virtue of his experience, sort of, actually. I think a newer player, I've seen newer players do this a lot, they just kind of get as much as they can done, even if they have no hope of finishing, rather when a better player would do the time ad first and then get things done. I feel like that's a very common divide we see, and it's the kind of thing that I feel like good experienced players, they have in their muscle memory. It's just obvious to them that that's how they should do it. They're generally better about time adding in time and before they need it and things like that, whereas newer players are more likely to do it as just a total desperation thing. There's a flood of questions about this tool in chat. Do you want to finish this game up and then we can answer some of those?
All right, let's go for it. So I'm going to start at 1 second before the time ad and just play it out and see what happens. 3, 2, 1, go. So we add green time ad, and it's perfectly timed. Like for Magician is like-minded with me, where we actually find ourselves in desperate green ad at 0 seconds things. He times it perfectly. The nice thing about time ad is it's the same amount of time every time. We pick up a swap, and I actually, after this game, I want to go back to that moment, because I actually really love what the sniper's laser is doing at that point. And then we go back to the other side and pick up this inspect to finish inspect, because we actually put down the statue so quickly on the other side of the swap that it wasn't we weren't seen, and it didn't have time to do the inspect. And then we hop into a conversation with DA to finish this banana bread. And then we have a wrong shot. Now, I want to go back real quick, and so I want to look at the swap. So right now, when the swap happens, Magician walks over, adds time, and during the time ad, Papa Danger is off screen entirely because Bloom is 100% focused on Ambassador and Trey and wants to keep both those things in view because of a desperation last second move, right? Then he pivots over. Yeah.
Yes. He's off screen for 20 seconds after the time ad. In fact, walking away from the statue, you can see just a little bit of his highlight head between the statue and the bush. You can see like this kind of glowing hair, just a little bit peek out, and that is it.
I almost wish that I would just turn off the arrows for that to see how, because with the big green arrow, it looks a little bit more apparent than I think it actually is.
You see the white outline. Yeah. In fact, I would say it would be basically invisible if you didn't have him highlight. There's one of the values right there. I forget what actually measures suspicion. We talk about this a lot. Even if you're only using a highlight to measure a thing like statue visits and it doesn't denote suspicion in and of itself, even though it correlates, obviously. You're not just highlighting whoever you're most suspicious of. You're trying to track a thing instead of memory. They're still glowing. They're still glowing, and you're a human being, which means you're going to see them better and notice them better.
Right. And so I think that I think that the shot at the end is a panic shot because the person who swaps statue is out of conversation during the banana bread. So I think that Bloom may have even finally noticed this swap, but he knows it's a green swap because the banana bread goes off at the same time, which might have been a little bit early because Taft might have jumped into a conversation.
Well, that's a classic decision, isn't it? We have actually talked about this for like years and probably brought this up in Slowcast before. This is a conundrum that has no answer. When you're doing a swap like this, when you're doing a green swap and someone goes to swap it for you, you can think one of two ways. One is you want to make sure they're in for the contact because then maybe it's down to a 50-50 if they don't see the fade, right? The other is you're using the contact to distract from the swap, throwing a little more chaff in the air. And when it's the last mission in particular, you're only giving them 10 seconds to sort through all that chaos. But you're knocking out the green swapper too. Right. There is no answer to that. Both of those things are right at certain times.
Yeah, and it's actually, we get a bit fortunate because we are actually in the only conversation with the DA in it when the banana bread goes off, and it seems like it's obvious that it's a banana bread, but at this point, Bloom is just panicked because he has no idea what's going on.
Yes, and he has no idea what's going on because the spy was off camera for the time ad. No one seemed like they were at windows, and then he was off camera for the next 20 seconds and not seen its statues. He just doesn't rotate. I don't want to take away from Magician here because he actually did the most with what he had after getting into this position, but it's all possible because Bloom decides to protect here on this side because Toby's off to his right a little bit from the sniper's perspective, and the ambassador's right in front of him, and Smallman is right next to the ambassador, and he's just staring, especially with the clock hanging, because now if he hears beeps, he's going to know someone just triggered. Maybe someone just finished a flirt, something like that. So he's waiting to see who am I going to shoot if and when these beeps start, and Magician is off camera the whole time.
Indeed, and this set, just historically, had already seen another hanging green time ad clock, and it's going to be kind of a familiar thing. So let's just jump into the next replay. Yeah. So the snipers have been dominant so far this set. Actually, let me update the scoreboard, because now we are at the position where Magician has just taken an 8-5 lead, and I believe just needs one win at this point to take it home.
Yeah. He's after that he's up 8-5. So he has 3 games to win a single game, and one of them, his first one, is a sniper game on Courtyard. So he's in good shape here. And look, Bloom is a good spy and all, but his strength when he was in SCL was always his sniper, like very consistently. His spy was fine, but most of his best wins were just his sniper was suffocating. He drew with Kaylee at 1.66, and that was a sniper party. That's just the way it goes. So, this is a game Magician should win, and this should keep him in Diamond right here in a bit of an upset.
Indeed. So this is another one where I think I'm going to fast forward a little bit because we have another thing where I think just in the kind of the environments that we all know that are kind of created through a long match that's been tense in SpyParty is at some point, sometimes the players get hesitant. And I think that neither player is really aggressive because they're kind of nervous. It's also Courtyard. Sometimes you just want to get that progress in. But we have the big move is at 135. Up until this point, all we've really done is gotten seduction up to 85%, and then we hit a green purloin at 135. And let's watch that play out for a second. Starting in 3, 2, 1, playing it. So we have the reject. It's probably it's a noticed reject potentially, but right now we're watching a lot of things. We're kind of eyeing sorry, I think, quite a bit. And then the purloin happens, and I think it takes a second while during this rotation for a magician to notice. I think we might have talked about this before, but sometimes in courtyard there's a bad habit for snipers that when they rotate, they pull their eyes in the direction that they're rotating, and they're not actually looking at the thing that's in front of them. So I don't think the actual purloin is seen right away.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to vary from player to player, but it sure feels like anecdotally, and that's certainly the case with me, and I'm tempted to say it's a bit of a human nature thing, that when you're rotating to the right, your eyes are not at the center of the screen. They're towards the edge of the rotation. They're towards the far direction that you're rotating in, because you're trying to see the thing that's just coming into view, on courtyard in particular. So I think often you'll see something that's dead center on the camera, but because they're moving, they're actually looking past it already, because they feel like they've already scanned that part.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause right here. Now, let's look at the state of the game before that purloin. So where we were at? We were at, we just got a flirt off, and so at 136, with neutral light 136, 85% seduce. What's our win rate?
45%. So pretty close, actually, to the standard courtyard thing, because you still have a lot of time left on the clock, and you haven't been highlit. And I also think there's just a lot of games in here at that point where maybe the spy is already selling out on the frame, but it's still really early. And this is actually very interesting for me, just as a caster, to see how the die is not at all cast when you still have this much time left. A minute and a half doesn't seem like a lot, but it's more than enough on courtyard. So I feel like anecdotally, if I hadn't seen this, I would see the situation, 90 seconds or whatever, and I would say, okay, they're running a little slow. They might be in trouble. But in reality, they've only lost a few percentage points because there's still a lot of time to get stuff done, and you still get plenty of civ shots.
Yeah, so but basically what's dropped out of the replays at this point are rushes, essentially.
Yes.
And so it seems like rushes, the things that haven't happened yet are rushes, and it doesn't, if that percentage was drastically higher or lower, I think it would be a very general threshold for the success rate of rushes on this map. And it seems like they're pretty much what the win rate is on just doing a normal or a longer game, let's say. Because this looks like a pretty normal, regular game so far. We haven't gone for the early inspect, so it seems basically in line with everything else that would have happened.
But the thing I really want to highlight here is that as casters, we'll often talk about their lack of progress, we'll worry, and we're treating getting to mission win countdown as a proxy for winning the game. And there are areas in these games where those two things diverge a little bit. And this is an example of that. At this point in the game, Bloom is, in my opinion, a little behind the curve to get to countdown. But that's not the same thing as saying that he's losing his chance of winning meaningfully, because at this point he hasn't yet.
Gotcha. Okay, so we were about 45, so we're about baseline. So now let's go about to the point where Purloin gets noticed. And I think Purloin gets noticed when we low light Toby. And that's right when the banana bread comes off. So before the fake banana bread, which that's another thing that right now the tool can't really parse out. I'm assuming, and would also be kind of difficult to parse out. Like, yes, no, has a fake banana bread happened?
Oh no, I mean that's something we can do, and I may or may not do it. It's going to depend on whether or not the amount of work involved makes sense. But we can definitely parse. There has been a fake at this point. We won't be able to parse out all the here's who was in, here's who was out. There's a lot of stuff there we can't do, but we can say there was a fake from this point on, right? We could do it as a binary thing. We could also count the number of fakes, although I think at that point we're at serious diminishing returns, and we just need more data. Play more, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
But yes, that is something we can do, and it's something we might do. So I think after this game, I'll get to answering some of these questions that are piling up.
So let's do 1 minute. 1 minute, we've purloined. We haven't gotten any other mission progress. We've purloined, seduced, or no, sorry, we haven't seduced. We're purloined 85%, but we're not highlit. And it's long enough that we would have been highlit. Because one of the things that you shouldn't do with this tool when eventually it becomes public is notice if they've been highlight right away. You got to give the sniper a second to see if they catch up with the highlight, right?
Yes.
So at 1 minute, though,
the fudge factor, the 20 seconds either way should account for that.
That's true.
And I might let people augment that too, but you're right. There's things like that too. And I've also considered whether or not to do things like, well, always log whether or not a shot came off 10 seconds later. Because if 9 seconds passed after the bug and they're not shot yet, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, does it? Because a lot of snipers wait and shoot when they have to and not the moment they think they know who it is. So, like I said, more art than science. A lot of changes coming. But 1 minute left, you're saying. Purloin's done. Seduce is most of the way done. We're not high lit. And the win probability calculator says 59%.
So in just that move, it's not going to surprise anybody here. Green Purloin into not getting highlight, good, but the ability to understand the magnitude of how good, it seems like it 50% increase, about a little bit less maybe.
A little bit less, more like 20. Well, 50% relative to its own baseline. You mean
Yes.
50% of the 33%, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Yes, even higher actually.
Well, of the 40, I think we're like at 45 with just Seduce.
Right.
Ago.
Yes, you're right. It is.
So we basically, I think that honestly that sounds about right, if not even just a little bit low. But I think that also presents a situation where Blue obviously doesn't have the ability to kind of randomly calculate what his win chance are, but a good portion of that of you've purloined, you're not highlit, is that a shot could come off from the wrong person. So I would say a good deal of that win chance is a shot coming off on a wrong person.
Yes,
and so
probably.
Let's jump ahead until right before the banana bread, which is at 30, let's say 1 second. Before that banana bread comes off, we are at 31 seconds, and we're the same situation. So the exact same thing has happened, but we're 30 seconds left. Has the win probability changed?
Yes, it's dropped from almost 60 to just over 50 by not doing anything for that 30 or 40 seconds. That's a really crucial 30 or 40 seconds. So I mentioned earlier that with 1:30 on the clock, they were in roughly the same positions when they started, even though they didn't have that much progress. Just a pretty good chunk of flirt, which is significant because flirt's the kind of thing that, can eat up a lot of your time. But the difference from 1:30 to 1 and 1 to 30, pretty big. This is where you really get into it. I'm starting to think that the 30-second threshold in particular is really huge. And I think, we'll see if this comes up with some of the other games, I think there's a threshold beyond which the sniper has decided to hold, so to speak, right? Like the really cheap, give you a free win kind of civ shot, especially post-purloin, has usually come off by now. So I think there's going to be a drop when you get below that 30 seconds, and we can already see a significant drop from 1 minute to 30 seconds.
Right, and I that's the exact point that I think is important. There is we're getting into the point where the tool has basically kind of spit out. It seems like the purloin hasn't gotten a shot yet. So I would say that the biggest chunk of that marginal difference at that point is we are in a position where if he faked a banana bread, so he didn't go for mission progress. He didn't seem like he was going for mission progress because he was hoping someone would get shot. And to Magician's credit, no shot did come off, either because you're in that state where the sniper feels so far behind they don't even feel like they can make an informed decision about who to shoot, so they just don't shoot anybody. But that timing is starting to dwindle away before we go for the banana bread, which at that point we've kind of returned back to trying to finish missions. So now basically 1 second later, we have the banana bread. Is there a significant difference at that point?
Okay, so 1 second later, so we go to 30 instead of 31, and we give them the contact, and we only go up a couple percentage points. And that makes sense to me. I think not all missions are created equal here. Like, just intuitively, if you were casting this kind of thing, we'd say something like, yeah, well, you got away with the purloin, or you might have gotten away with the purloin. You're not dead, at least, and you're not high-lit, but you haven't contacted. We would say contact is one of the big things that might prompt a shot, right? Before that point, you might not feel like you have to shoot, even though there's been a fake, and inspect is the other one. So I'm not surprised that there's not a big difference here, because the contact has already come off, and this one might seem like a desperation. So I don't know if it changes the status quo very much, unless he's on that list already.
Yeah, so I agreed. Wait, especially like if we were circled, there's all these kind of research projects that you would inherently pop up to mind of like, what's the difference between contact on all the different maps at halfway through the game, and Courtyard is probably one of the least, right? Because Courtyard Banana Bread is one of the easiest to pick up missions in the game. I want to say it's usually pretty compelling. It doesn't knock out that many people. Because the tool itself should kind of capture, like, if you got a banana bread on a map that a lot of people, you're probably giving up a lot of lowlights. Statistically, if it's a large enough sample size, your win rate should reflect that. Like, it might even drop on certain maps where if enough people are consistently outside of it, banana bread not being good,
Mm-hmm. Well, so you're right about it not giving off many lowlights and it being one of the easiest missions. In fact, anecdotally, I can just already remember a handful of examples on cast where we said, wow, that's a perfect banana bread. Just meaning nobody's outside of conversation that isn't cast, right? I can't think of any off the top of my head other than like balcony or some of the 3 mission variants where that's true other than courtyard. It never happens on gallery. It never happens on veranda. It never happens on library. Courtyard, it does happen occasionally, and it could happen more if spies really, really, really wanted to make a point to do it. So, yeah, contact is definitely different on this venue than most others in that regard.
Okay. All right, well, jumping back into the game, so we're at 30 seconds. We've just contacted, so it seems like it's less likely that a wrong shot's going to come off at this point, unless this second contact happens to prompt a shot. But let's go ahead and play back at 30 seconds in 3, 2, 1, go. So we still have to
Bloom
flirt.
needs to win this. If he loses, he's out.
That's right. Yes, to even keep himself alive in this match, he has to absolutely win this, which is, at this point, looking a little tough. And just, this is less statistically minded, but it would appear that you would think that the option to do a green time ad would be less appealing in a game that would be back-to-back with another one of those, right? Like, just because it's fresh in the last player's mind. But it does look like that's exactly what we're going for. And another really well-timed, last time, Kane was completely off-screen during that time ad, but this time it's not. The other thing I want to say here is, there should only be one thing on Magician's mind, and that is pending swap or green, as opposed to green time ad, because Perlin's gone.
Right. No, you're right. So it should be even easier to catch. And by the way, speaking of timing, the green time ad in the previous game was 0.6 seconds. This was 0.5. So Bloom did him literally one better.
Right. So another because we just love adding caveats here. Another caveat with this tool so far is going to be it won't be able to tell the difference, I imagine, between a 45 seconds that has just been the last second time ad versus actually 45 seconds left in the game. Is that correct?
Well, it can't yet, but that's something we can do. I mean, if you can infer it from the timeline data, you can do it. So we probably are going to add a lot more of these things over time. In fact, one of the things we're doing this for right now, you and I, is to determine which things are worth adding and which things are not. But you can see here from the green time ad, you basically get the exact same thing as the previous game, is a sniper who's not expecting the beeps from the green time ad and doesn't know who to shoot and just shoots someone.
Yeah, exactly. So this to me, it was really fascinating when I was looking back on this, because this is another one of those things that can't really show up statistically. So right now, we're one of 3 highlights, and so it's looking real bad, and especially because we know that the beeps are going to come off and that someone's going to get shot, and we just finished doing inspects. And we actually end up flirting right in front of Magician. And I think that is the reason why he wins this game, is he goes and shoots someone on the other side of the map when this happens, because I think that he's trying to bait out a flirt finish. So we have the flirt finish. We can see him talking right in front of us, but we go and check because Magician is smart enough to know that he has a long time to shoot. And I think he looks for between the talkers. And so it just happens that Irish on the other side is talking. And I think that he's reasoning, okay, if I'm equally suspicious of these 2 people, I'm going to shoot the person that is kind of off screen, that wouldn't be bold enough to try to finish with flirts, knowing that there'd be beeps directly in front of me. And I think that decision makes sense, because if I'm Bloom and I'm in this position and all I see is a sea of lowlights, and I'm the only person in that conversation, and I'm talking right at the same time as the finish goes off, I think I'm dead, because I think the sniper's just going to panic shoot. But Magician actually takes a second level bit of thinking, one that actually gets him killed, because I think I don't know if Bloom is going for these kind of mind games, but I think that he basically goes and checks, which is smart, first of all, because it basically has to be a flirt at this point, unless he's also checking for swap on the far side. And he shoots someone on the other side that would be finishing out of sight. And then that ends up winning Bloom the game.
And I want to give Magician some credit, because if you look earlier at the game, jump back to 218, if you would, real quick from the replay sniper side. And what you're going to see is the person who's eventually shot, that's Green Dress, going up next to General, the other highlight, who is the person she's talking next to at the end, sipping a drink at statues, goes there second, looks like she's flirting with General. She even takes a little while to pick up the statue and everything, can be flirting during the sip. Looks like a flirt. He might have them flirt paired. They're both highlit. And then at the end, she's talking next to him again. So this really, honestly, based on what he has or hasn't seen, obviously you want to catch the purloin and all the other stuff. But based on this, I kind of get why he would pick this talker rather than the other one, for the reasons you mentioned and for this one.
Oh, that's a fantastic point. I didn't even catch that in the other thing, where, we are talking, and we are right next to the...
and it's a short little path. Because, look at this. They're in the same conversation together. I think, let me see here. Let me confirm that. I think they're in the same convert. No, they're not. Okay, but it's just a short little path right in next to, let's say, possibly your seduction target. It looks so much like a spy saying, "Hey, there's my ST at statues. Here's my chance." Uh, it's just unfortunate, but it's one of those things where a magician would have been better off if he didn't notice.
Yeah, that is funny, right? But I think that goes to the larger points of our ability to create plausible stories on the fly. Sometimes it's too powerful. Like if we remember something where just random chance. Although I mean, we did just get unlucky that, and not only that, she's really nestled up into General at the end there too. I get that
Yes.
shot. It's funny because the thing is, if General was the one talking at the end, I don't know if General would have gotten shot because
No, I don't
General
know
wasn't
either.
the person that approached.
Yeah, it depends on how much of this he remembers. He might just remember that they were both highlit and he suspected them of flirting, but maybe he wasn't sure who arrived in what order. It's not really clear, but maybe he does remember, and maybe he was specifically suspicious of her and not General. I don't know, and I imagine if I asked Magician 3 years later, he might not know either at this point. But it certainly doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. It seems like he probably noticed something there, even if by the time of the shot it was just a little thing in the back of his mind that so and so was suspicious.
Indeed. Okay, well, I guess it's time to move on to another set. Unfortunately, I played around the tool for this one. The circumstances are too specific. You just find this game, but I think that I really enjoyed watching the percentages change around. There's a spike for Purloin, and that the Purloin, like right now, plausibly because of someone else getting shot, kind of diving there, kind of reinforces something, or I guess exposes something that feels intuitive, which is if this happens to you, if you are in Bloom's position and no one's gotten shot after you faked, after you got apparently a good green purloin, you actually do need to go try to do something.
Yes.
You couldn't just wait around. And then we were able to get a shot. Now, I think that a lot of the times we're not going to get this lucky for Bloom, but at least we gave ourselves an out after the wrong shot did happen to come off.
Yeah, we did the fake early enough in the game that if a shot doesn't come off, you still have a lot of time to finish potentially, whether you get there or not. You've given yourself that option. And I also think I like doing that earlier. I like creating that point earlier in the game where the two things the sniper's waiting on have already happened, because then every little thing that happens is them going, ah, crap, is that it? Is that the finish? That's when you get shot for talks. That's when AIs get shot for a boring inspect, is when more of the game has happened after those two crucibles, the contact and the hardtail, in this case, the hardtail that shows, be it a swap or a purloin. So I think that's another example of Bloom just sort of understanding, maybe intuitively, if not consciously, that it's better to do these kinds of things by the middle of the game.
Indeed. Okay, so I guess it's probably time to jump into one of the Crazy Kaylee matches. Anything strike
Yeah.
you as a particularly great place to start?
Um, no, I'm not really sure. I guess probably the very first one chronologically, which is KCM Crazy Kaylee. I do want to ask though, do we want to stop and answer some of these questions about the tool? Do we want to sprinkle them in and come back to them between games, or do we want me to try to get as many of them done as possible? Because people seem very curious about this.
I would say answer the ones that make sense, that they don't need any context, like you'd only be showing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I will go through this real quick. Gabriel asks, how many games does this include? SCL Cups, Hidden Cups, Snipe Arcade. Right now, 26,000 games, which covers SCL and 3 Winter Cups and the last 3 Summer Cups. There might be more later, but generally speaking, we're being careful with the data set until we can really parse it properly. So 26,000 games, most of the biggest competitive events. What databases games running on? Just my own creation. I've parsed the timeline data from Calvin. I had my own database long before that existed, which just contained players and schedules and results and things like that. But the more granular data came from Calvin. He's put it out publicly in JSON form, and I've parsed it into my own format. But it's not too different, and anyone can access it certainly. 26,000 games, 1.5 million game states, which is basically an entry for each timeline event that doesn't happen at 0 seconds, because I don't bother to put all the cast data in this. As for weight, highlighter, low lit, I have a very preliminary low light count in there because, for example, if someone time adds early in the game and the sniper catches it and they have it narrowed down to 2 people, sometimes we see them low light everyone but those 2, right? And there's no mission progress. And the tool, without low light tracking at that point, would not see anything wrong with this scenario. It would say, no, you're still at 45 or 50%. Don't worry about it, buddy, because it doesn't realize there are 12 low lights on veranda in the first 30 seconds of the game. And that is a big, big problem. So I have started preliminarily tracking low lights like that. The problem is there's a lot of weird stuff about people being brought back up. Some people literally click off and on for fun as snipers. I hate you, by the way. You're ruining our data set. And I can compensate for that a little, but I can't get like a super highly accurate count. What I can really get is a range of lowlights without like parsing this on a really granular level that probably isn't worthwhile. As long as we know that there's like somewhere between 8 and 10 lowlights, that gives us a pretty good idea what's going on. I haven't incorporated that into the probability too much yet, but that is something we're going to have to do over time because, as I just mentioned from that hypothetical, sometimes a handful of lowlights make a really really huge difference. And I think that's just good for now. But keep throwing questions out there, and we'll find some more as we go.
We have a pretty decent name potentially for a little bit.
Do we? Are you talking about the one I was throwing out earlier?
No, there's one in chat that is it's good flavor. It makes sense.
Where is it? I didn't see it.
It's Corvus's.
Oh, where have we got? Winning. Oh God.
It's good.
Oh man. Ugh. I mean, first of all, brilliant, appealing to my vanity. Like, absolutely great. Like, flattery will get you everywhere. Ugh, so good. I think the version of this that is measuring your likelihood to reach countdown should probably be called that, maybe. And there still might be two. Again, I think it's useful to have a are they pacing themselves out well to finish kind of measurement, and also a are they going to win the game, because those are not the same thing, but we'll revisit that. Anyway, back to the games, I guess. KCM Kaylee Veranda?
KCM Kaylee Veranda. Okay, so let me see if I can... Do we know the stakes at this point for this one? Or I'm just going to go...
Let me find out here. This is SCL Season 3. So this is the championship match. This is otherwise known as, the Time Ad Beeps game match. This isn't the game. This is the match where it happened, though. But it's easy to forget that in a lot of ways, even though that's the most memorable thing that happens and the coolest thing that happened, and literally maybe the coolest thing that's ever happened playing SpyParty for that matter, it's actually not the most impressive game and the most interesting game to analyze because it's one big gambit at the end and there's no precedent for it. But people forget, in KCM's very next Spy game, also on Veranda, he busted out a ridiculous mission win as Seek that kept him in the match because he was down 5-2 heading into this. Down 5-2 heading into a Spy game on Veranda. I mean, he basically could have lost it right here, but he pulled it back and kept it close. And that alone means that if his maneuver had worked 2 games earlier, he would have probably tied this and forced it in overtime. But this is probably one of his best ever mission wins, and it's right after a more memorable failure.
Yeah. Okay. So, like you're saying, this is at this point. This will stand out to a lot of people as one of the greatest matches because at this point, I think that it was basically unanimously considered the greatest match that had been played in SpyParty at the time. And I don't think that there was a lot of contention at that point. It was one of the only ones that we had streamed. It was finals. We were ecstatic that it was this amazing of a match. That
yes.
I mean, we hadn't had really great streaming for the first few finals, and I think around season 3 is when we really started hitting our stride, just on a casting perspective. Like I think our ability to really start putting production values went way up in season 3, and so everything started coming together. And I think that this is when a lot of people bought in to the premise of how much we could do as a community with our competitive play, with our production, and with our casting, and it all started coming together in this match. I just really recall that vividly.
I will half agree with you. I think you're right in spirit, and there's like a very technical, very tiny little niggling disagreement. SCL 1, there's no cast, as far as I can tell. SCL 2, there was a cast, but we did like 3 kind of like exhibition matches beforehand. It was Magician and Kaylee. It was a little janky. We were still figuring it out, but that we cast the finals of SCL Season 2. SCL Season 3, obviously we did this, and it's an incredible match. And the casting was starting to mature. We had more casts in SCL Season 3 than maybe we'd ever had combined before competitively. SCL Season 4 is where it hit a whole new level, but I think you're correct in that one of the reasons it hit a new level in SCL Season 4 was because of the way SCL Season 3 ended. Obviously, it took a huge leap forward when Kaplow came in and gave us those cool assets and launched on Steam, and we had over 100 people in the SCL for the first time ever, but SCL Season 3 finals, I think, convinced people that it was worth getting a little more invested for SCL Season 4.
Indeed, yeah. I think it exploded my interest as far as like what we could do, because I think like before we were kind of worried about what could we do with casting, because like some of the win probabilities are going to show, stuff just kind of happens every once in a while in SpyParty, and we weren't sure about how exciting. But then we started seeing some of the most interesting tech out of the very famous beep play, and just the creativity of trying to. I think this is one of the first sustained attempts at a specific player grinding for, I would assume, weeks to try to beat a specific person, right? And a very intelligent and I believe networked attempt where KCM worked with a bunch of players to make this match happen and planned out a lot of these different games because he knew that KCM is a very adaptable player, but on the game, the reason we went for this on Veranda wasn't just that there's a hidden time ad spot. It's that he figured it was one of the ways that he could maximize his win chance on Veranda, which I believe I looked at Kaylee's stats on Veranda. It's 95% sniper win rate or something like that over all seasons. Yep. It might even be 100. I think 100 is library. I don't think he might have 100% win rate on library as sniper.
It should be neither, although unless you're talking about one season in particular.
It's something up there. It might be, I might have just been looking at season.
So historically, he's actually higher on. This was one thing I felt very proud of back in the day, back when I had to pick, when I had to play Crazy Kaylee and decide what to ban and what not. Most people ban library against him for obvious reasons. They think he's, or Veranda, the other way around or whatever. But his funny thing is his win rates on library and Veranda are actually similar. They're both in the mid to low 90s. Historically, right now. After this took place, we have more data. 95% on Veranda, 92% on library, but his win rate on Veranda Spy is a little bit higher. So there was sort of like an arbitrage opportunity there, and it took people a little while to figure out that his favorite venue was not necessarily his strongest, and that's an important distinction for a lot of players to make. But yes, KCM's idea specifically was, I have a better chance of winning my sniper Veranda game, rather. And so if I can steal a game from him on Veranda as Spy, just with a trick, it's absolutely huge, especially early in the match. Maybe you get, nobody's immune to being tilted a little by something like that. So I really appreciate the strategy there. And just to start us off here, if you take all 5 of 8 variants in this tool, it says just north of 37% as a starting point. Mm-hmm. So already pretty bad.
And that's also going to include players at all levels of experience. But here we are. This is not, by the way, the Veranda game. This is a different Veranda game.
The next one, his very next Spy game.
His very next Spy game would be this one. So this one actually kind of sets the stage of him playing more kind of like a straight up Veranda game, I think.
Yeah, and frankly, it just shows what a comeback. He tried this ridiculous maneuver. It didn't work. And by all accounts came incredibly close to working. And how's he respond? He responds with just a virtuoso mission win.
That's right. All right, well, let's go ahead and start in. And every once in a while, if I see an event, I might pause and ask for a win percent update. But let's go ahead and get into the game. I think we're well set up for it now. People are noticing the creepy Children of the Corn way that the characters used to spawn. It is true. I actually really miss it. I thought it was just always so funny. But anyways, we are starting with everyone agreeing to face the very specific direction. 3, 2, 1, playing it.
I think they're just pranking the sniper. You said Children of the Corn. I was thinking a little more classic 12 Angry Men, where the bigot won't stop talking and everyone just gets up and walks away and turns their back to him. It's a little like that. Nobody likes the sniper.
Actually, okay, I'm going to stop right here. Actually, I think it's going to get maybe...
We're never going to get through these games. My God, man.
I know, right? I think that because the time ad differences, just real quick, did we ever have game sets where we had above 430 on Veranda? I don't know if we ever normalized that. What is 4, if we go to 4 minutes and 35 seconds, what does the win rate tool give us? Because it has to be a time ad.
The same thing because of that 20-second fudge factor.
You're right.
So it doesn't really make any difference up front if you don't play with the progress at all.
Okay.
But this is very intriguing. After this point, there were a lot of examples of KCM and other people, but KCM in particular, trying to time ad early against Crazy Kaylee, and it just sabotaging his games immediately because he's very good at catching them. But this is one he seems to have gotten away with, and you see why he was reluctant to stop doing it, because when he does get away with it, his pacing is so good, and he uses those extra 45 seconds so well that it makes a massive difference. So getting away with this time ad is low-key maybe the most important part of the game, even though that doesn't show up in the probability.
Right. And I think that KCM's probably a little bit cognizant of the fact that there is enough going on the rest of the map that it's not a totally barren veranda game. It's well spaced out. It's not crazy. It's not intense, but it's not a game where everything settles immediately, because that sometimes happens on veranda. But anyways, jumping back
and
in.
Kaylee is off to the right. He's checking the far right statues for memorization and protecting the Amba as they move a little bit, and KCM's on the other left side doing a quick timeout and getting out of there. So super cool.
All right, starting in at 4:33 in 3, 2, 1, playing. I'm trying to think if maybe even like fast forwarding through this part. I might even just do that just to
Sure.
abuse the fact that we have this. So I'm gonna fast forward a little bit and just kind of summarize where we're at, because otherwise we're gonna.
Well, at 4 minutes we have a flirt and a fingerprint. That seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, that's great. So 4 minutes, flirt and well, I'm wondering if the tool is gonna be really confused, but I would love to see what the tool says, because the fact that we got a fingerprint and a flirt at 4 minutes to the tool is gonna be really weird, because that's normally in the first 15 seconds. But what does the tool
normally.
say?
Well, that's okay. So just with the flirt, right before the fingerprint, we've already bumped up our percentage a few points to 40%. Just by getting, and that's probably because of the time ad, because we really haven't lost any time. We basically are starting off with 40% of the flirt done for free, or close to it, because of that time ad. So we've gotten a few percentage points from that time ad basically right away. And then it's just normal fingerprint. It looks like it's not that difficult, I don't think. Let's see, that fingerprint alone actually doesn't help at all. We're still in like the normal range here, where there are a few enough results that the fingerprint has not helped. And this is actually one of the other things, though, that I've found. Very often I figure, okay, we're at X percentage, I'm going to add a fingerprint and watch the percentage go up. I'm amazed that I'd say at least half the time the percentage goes down after the fingerprint.
Yeah, I noticed that especially when I was poking around some library games, that also, depending on when you get it, one of the things that's going to be a limitation on the tool is, at least when we have an early one like this, we know it's an early fingerprint. Later on in the game, if you test it, it won't be able to really test the timing of the pickup yet. Like, if you
Correct.
are at 2 minutes left in the game and that you say, oh, we just picked up a fingerprint, the parser is going to be like, you have a fingerprint at 2 minutes. It could have been an early fingerprint. It could have been the first briefcase. It could have been a briefcase you picked up right at that minute. Currently, it's not going to be able to tell, so it's not going to have that kind of gradation.
Well, it should, unless you mean like something like a book or a drink that you can hold for a very long time before it.
Well, I mean, I would think it's a game state check. So I guess
Yes.
if we had,
So here's the thing. The game state includes everything. So it will include, if you're like moving around with the briefcase, it will check every time anything happens in the timeline. So if they lowlight someone, if they highlight someone, Spy puts down briefcase, Spy picks up briefcase, it's checking during all those. Anything that shows up on the timeline is checking again.
right. So here's what I mean then. Let's say we didn't do anything for 2 minutes, and then we were at the same state, it wouldn't know if we got that fingerprint at 4 minutes or got that fingerprint at 2 minutes and 3 seconds.
Oh, I see. So it differentiates from that point forward, but you're saying it doesn't differentiate as to when you got it, right? Like, our early fingerprint's more valuable.
Exactly. Yeah, we can't.
Correct.
It wouldn't be able to test that intuition right now, because that is
Yes.
obviously like a really interesting question: is the first briefcase suspicious or not? Is it more valuable, less valuable than the average fingerprint?
And that's probably super idiosyncratic. But I will say that the first couple times this happened, I thought, okay, maybe this is limitations of the tool. This doesn't make sense that the percentage would go down with a briefcase very much, or with a fingerprint rather. But I started seeing it often enough that I started to think it's actually fine. I think it's just a reflection of the fact that a fingerprint is not just free progress. Sometimes it is very, very suspicious to people. And one thing that confirms that is that when I plug one fingerprint into this exact moment here, 359, 40% flirt, neutral light, all that, I get 37.5%, right? But if I switch that one fingerprint to one difficult fingerprint, it jumps from 37% to exactly 50%.
Oof.
It's a very small
That's
sample
great.
size. But what that tells me, and some other anecdotal stuff of me just playing with this tool, my best guess, we're caveating all of this, of course, don't quote us. My best guess is that the first fingerprint in these situations is actually not that great for your mission win progress, because it's very suspicious and much more likely to be noticed at that point in the game. But if it's a difficult, it really does help.
That is fascinating. Like, we could do entire casts on that just alone.
Yes.
Like an entire 2-hour cast on the difference between difficults and normal fingerprints. But
Well,
that's
it just became obvious to me very early on that I needed to immediately build in the distinction between fingerprint and difficult fingerprint for that reason, and I'm really glad I did, because it's thrown off some very different numbers.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll jump back into the game at 4 minutes where we've just picked up, but it seems like it's not really gone one way or another. It's just getting progress. And at first it's Crazy Kaylee. I think it's just going to be he's going to note the fingerprint, and that's it. Like it's not going to be because that pool of players also includes people that will be additionally suspicious of that person.
Yes.
But it's just bumping up the threat ever so slightly. Okay.
And nothing happens for almost a minute. The contact comes at 3:17. We should probably just jump to events at this point, I would think. We do get another flirt in the meantime, though. So it's 74% on the flirt, one normal fingerprint, rather, 3:17 on the clock, and contact has just finished. And our win percentage at this point, even though very few games still, we're looking at like 9 games left that match this at this point, that gets us up to about 66%.
Interesting. So it's something where we're like 3:17. So it's not that so much time has passed, but it's pretty good progress because we had the time ad, we are in the class of games that were also mini rushes, I guess, or just like really aggressive.
The time ad is really showing up here now. Again, how's flirt work with the tracker? I'll just answer this real quick. That flirt percentage or better by this time is the way it works. You can plug in specific numbers.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the time ad is actually showing up here in really interesting ways because when you think about this, on one hand, you're thinking, well, this isn't that much progress. He's been playing for a little while. But look at this. Seduce is most of the way done. Contact is done. Another Softail is halfway done. And he's, as far as the starting clock is concerned, he's only used about a minute. And he's not highlight.
Yeah. Let me see if I can. One thing that I've been trying to do with this is and any 5 venues. Is round down to flirt thresholds because one of the things I've found is, although 74% is not that high, is when you get into the highest ones. Interesting. So if it's any venue and we have contact and part one blah blah blah, we are you get like 4 games if you round down to 66, which is close enough. Because to me, the difference between 74 and like 66 is pretty small. So that's another kind of like tip in the future for other people is if you get above like 90%, there's not a ton of games where someone has like 97, 98% flirts, and you're gonna locate the game pretty easily. So round down to what matters, which
85.
is exactly
Well, you're at 85, and that is a better way to think about it. Is what you really want to know is how many flirts is it going to take? Does a close one guarantee it? Does any flirt count? Does a green get you there? There are key thresholds, and that is you can kind of just make that up as you go. I'm jumping forward a little bit here again, just might as well, I figure. Also because we're way behind schedule, and I have a hard out in a little less than an hour. Boy. He's done a green microfilm in the meantime, and he's gone for a difficult fingerprint and missed it, but he has finished the microfilm there, and he's getting a lot of occlusion on the green bookshelf. So he's finishing microfilm with 125, and that's a big one, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I want to look real quick at the laser angle on. So we finished the second microfilm, which is probably the way to go versus Crazy Kaylee in this one because he is going to sell out on Ambassador and Purloin more than he's going to look at bookcase animations because he's prioritizing the fact that it's an any 5 of 8 map. So the microfilm, even if they do get away with it, he has other opportunities he thinks to catch them. So he's doing his typical prioritization stuff and probably trying to watch Seek's head, but Seek's head's he's not highlight. He hasn't gone to Statue's head or anything like that. He's only had the fingerprint. It was hard to see the head turn. So I think that the sequencing in this match was pretty good for KCM.
Yes. KCM sequencing is a big deal, and the highlight for statues comes in a lot here because look at this. He's gotten 3.5 missions done without a highlight, and I think that's why he gets away with it, and the tool seems to agree because his percentage at this point, with a couple dozen games, that's not a super tiny sample, but a couple dozen games at this situation once the microfilm is done, is just under 74%. So if you get this far in the game in a veranda game without that highlight, that's a really big deal.
Indeed. Okay. All right. So then let's go ahead and let's see what's the next big event.
He goes to finish the fingerprint on a book, and now he's visited all 3 bookshelves, by the way.
Which is at that point, I don't think Kaylee cares, But for most snipers that play with a bit of suspicion in mind, is not suspicious because why would they visit all 3 bookshelves? But
yes.
Anyways, and then we finish up the fingerprint. And then
90% at that point. 9 out of 10. It's 10 games. Spies have won 9 of them when they get to this point.
The other thing I want to look at real quick is just this little ballet of KCM goes for that microfilm, goes to red bookcase, goes right to statue to finish early. He doesn't go anywhere else. He just goes book, book statue,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Because he knows that Toby and Ambassador have stayed during this entire time. Toby and Ambassador have stayed on the right-hand side of the map, and Kaylee needs to protect that side. He's really worried about, especially looks like Twin on the other side. And so he abuses the timing window, because if Kaylee, or if KCM did this 3 seconds later, I think he's dead from the swap.
You might be right, but there's several things going on here that I really love. Okay, so first of all, you can see Kaylee just rotely highlights him and then looks to the right. He's not concerned about a swap here. And why would he be? For a couple different reasons. First, it's the initial highlight, which means it's the initial statue visit, which means he doesn't have inspects, which means this guy would have had to have gotten 2 hardtails, or a hardtail and a fingerprint by you without being a big suspect, which is in fact what happened. So Kaylee is not anticipating a finish here. He might be anticipating something that's going to help narrow the party down, but he clearly is not worried because it's a first statue visit rather than a second. Also, it's happening, let me see here, with almost exactly a minute left. There's another way of saying that, is that without that time ad, KCM would be approaching statues with 15 seconds left. And you got to imagine in that scenario, Kaylee's watching a lot closer for the swap.
Indeed, because I think that's a great point. I know we're behind the time, but that's actually maybe my favorite one so far, is that is the difference between KCM was able to get away with the microfilm, I think because Kaylee wasn't as worried about the microfilm at that point, because pacing-wise, other stuff was going to have to happen first. So we got fingerprints and microfilm before getting a highlight, right?
Yes.
And I think that's extremely important for KCM in this game. And then he gets a little bit of fortune where he's able to do a bunch of missions on the left-hand side of the map while Purloin or Toby and Ambassador on the other side. But that's the kind of thing you have to do, is you open up yourself a window so that you can do everything you need to in a window of time before Kaylee is going to prioritize looking at what you're doing, because right now he's so focused on Purloin, because Purloin, normally Green Purloin is kind of the way you win versus Kaylee, and you mix that with something else, hope for a bunch of rejects, and then maybe you get something in the timing, but KCM sets it up perfectly. I really love this game.
The distinction's so good because one of the reasons people like Green Purloin against Kaylee is that it's a way you can win or force him into a difficult position even if he sees everything, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you get a couple of rejects, he has to make a tough choice, and if you get the right rejects, he has to make an even tougher choice. So you're assuming Kaylee's going to see everything because he's Kaylee, so I'm going to do the thing that might work even if he sees everything. KCM says, no, I'm just going to do the thing where he doesn't have that reason to look at me, much reason to look at me in the first place. And it works out really well. And you see how your entire game gets better when you know from the start you're not going to try to complete inspects, by the way. It's harder, but when you do it, it can work much better because you realize that relying on those inspect finishes, it's a crutch for both spies and snipers alike. And Kaylee is so strong on his routine, which is what makes him a good sniper, but it also is the thing that creates these little openings, and KCM's one of the few players good enough to exploit that.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see, and also KCM immediately swaps when getting there, because he knows like he's got a timing window for Kaylee to come over and check, and it works out beautifully. This is one of the cleanest spy wins against Kaylee. It wasn't trickery, it was just wonderful abuse of the window of time that KCM had available to him, and knowing what Kaylee feels like he needs to prioritize, because again, for better or for worse, Kaylee will prioritize locking down certain amounts of information, and so he's more concerned with just the general part of the party that would be available to do something on Bug and Purloin, because it's true, if you completely lock down Bug and Purloin on Veranda, and you are really confident about it, there is so little that you can do as spy. It's suffocating as spy, because inspects are so trivially easy to get, that this packet of missions is basically the perfect way to kind of play out versus Kaylee and probably a lot of other snipers.
Agree totally. Let's see if we can bang out a couple of these other ones in like 5 or 6 minutes each.
Okay.
Let's get. Let's say the cast probability success tool says we're behind schedule right now. Our pacing is very off, so let's catch up on that.
Okay.
What do you think's good here? There's Kaylee Dowsey. There's Kaylee Aberar, which that's actually pretty quick, I think. Kaylee Aberar on Tan.
Kaylee Aberar on Tan. All right, let's do it.
Because it's really straightforward. It's not like really fascinating or anything. It's just like a straightforward, like, here's how we know this is a good shot. And the thing I like about this is that this is the one I picked for the greatest matches list, right? This is the shot on Kane. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what I like about this. This isn't like magical or anything. It's not amazing. But But what I like about this is that we sensed intuitively on stream that it was a very surprising shot, and the data roughly backs it up. Just real straightforward, right? It's one of those things where the data matches the intuition and gives and kind of rounds it out a little bit. Because if you look at like the middle of this game, let's see here. It's Taeyeon, right? Taeyeon's still kind of new at this point. We still had more guests. This is the first Winter Cup, by the way. Winter Cup 19. Berar had not played much competitively at all. Still has not played in SEL to this day, and this was probably his biggest event at the time, by far even. And there wasn't as much book on him. I know that certainly hurt me when I had to play him, and I think it probably hurt Kaylee a little bit too. No one was really able to study him that much, but he was still a very, very good player. And you see, if we get to a certain point in this game here, about 1 minute 5 seconds, Bug, Contact, Purloin are all done, and he's 1 flirt away with a full minute left, and he's not dead yet. So Kaylee's in really good position here.
Yeah, and so what did the stats say about the position that we're in at that point?
Yeah, let's take a look here. Purloin, Bug, Contact done, 85% flirt, 1 minute and let's say 3 seconds. And he is not a highlight because he hasn't gone to statues. 22 matching games, almost 82% spy win.
Yeah.
Really good.
And that makes sense because there's so many things going on where we're in the highly enviable position of a Purloin has gone off, a green Purloin has gone off on Taeyeon, which just a lot of times you're just going to get a wrong shot. And we have the out of having Bug and Contact also that we only need to get that one last flirt in. So there's both a threat of a wrong shot and an easy path to a final mission, and that last mission is flirt. So something in the tool that I would definitely dive into later is, I mean, obviously it's best if you can sequence it in this way where all you have left is this one flirt. And I think the tool is going to be very responsive to the fact that it's like, oh, you have a minute left and you have a single flirt left. Generally speaking, the spy is going to do pretty well in that game because the sniper is going to have to shoot for flirt, or something goes horribly wrong with seduction target. And maybe that's honestly the games that are lost in that data set is seduction target is incredibly unhelpful. But because that is one of the times where the intuition actually matches the data, where it's like, oh yeah, that's a real high percent.
Well, I have already thought, I've wondered to myself whether or not 4-7 and 4-8s are good enough for most things, but for gallery, for example, we might need to make an exception, make it its own thing like balcony for that exact reason. But yes, generally when you get down to one flirt, we understand intuitively that's a big deal. When 10 seconds pass after this bug and no shot comes off, we're freaking out on cast at that point. We think we're about to see, a huge spy win from Kaylee. And then when this shot comes off, let me see here, we're down to about, 52 seconds. And yeah, at that point, we're looking at basically an 80% spy win rate. And a bear pulls it back with the shot for the talk. And we reacted appropriately, it turns out, with the data. It really was a really good shot and a very improbable win.
Indeed, and this was going to be incredibly important because if Crazy Kaylee is able to get wins on something like Taeyeon, that would have been a bit of a disaster because Taeyeon was statistically, I think, continues to be his worst map, even worse than High Rise. And so him being able to pull out even like a draw on this kind of a map was going to be pretty impressive, which I think he actually might have. And then it continued the streak of really impressive sniper wins because this particular match was some of the best sniping we've ever seen and different types of sniping. And then, but it was able to carry through even the strange sniper win maps of things like Taeyeon and I think High Rise. I think High Rise might have been one of the breaks though.
It was, yes, and Kaylee did indeed hold serve on the next game, shot Smallman on Taeyeon, and that was the 10th game, and they were all sniper wins. It was 5-5, 10 sniper wins, so this was a really big deal. He would have been in big trouble otherwise. It ended up being a very close match. Obviously, Berar didn't quite pull it out, but one of the reasons it stayed close was because of this shot, so very cool.
It was very cool, and it also probably was something where, Kaylee's not going to really get shaken as sniper, but sometimes it might affect his spy play because it's going to recalibrate, I guess it's more than shake, where it's going to make him potentially a little bit nervous about flirt finishes because I think in his mind, he's not going to shoot for a flirt finish. He doesn't really track flirt. Like, even though it's a mission that you have tracking, he
thinks he's on free there.
Exactly.
Yeah, almost certainly.
Yeah.
Really surprised you didn't go with shaken or stirred there, but I'll take it. Let's go to the same kind of game. We have another game that should be real quick because it's a similar premise. We might as well pair them together. Opie Wrights and Yeesh on Aquarium. It's Kane again, and it's another occlusion venue for that matter. And this time, it's the SCL5 Gold Championship. And it's the same thing. It's Purloin and Bug. Now, granted, Aquarium's a little different, so we might play around with this a little bit. But this is Opie rushing as he likes to do. And if you go to 224, he already has Bug, purloin, contact, half the flirt, partial progress on the inspects.
And what do we have
That's
for
a
that?
lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, I would love to check this one out. So let's plug this one in, and then I actually don't know which of the two he's going to go for, inspect finish or seduce finish, but I wonder how.
You want to try it?
I want to try the tool to see if it's different between having partial inspect, partial seduce. Because like this is one of the big things is we really have had no idea how impactful having multiple outs is. Because, you really want the one out. You want the ability to either finish flirt or finish seduce in one go, if you can. And I wonder if the tool respects the fact that we have multiple outs, even though we are only going to use one of the two. We're either going to seduce or we're going to inspect. Probably seduce.
Well, at this point, because he's a neutral light in particular, that's why I picked 224, because he's about to be highlight and he hasn't yet. He's 75% at this point with a modest data set. So pretty significant. But if I take 1 second away and make him a highlight, he goes from 75% to 40. Just like that. This highlight that Yeesh gives him right here, this little stealth, almost kind of pretty quick. Quick highlight at 223, that plummets the win rate there.
Yeah, and I'm gonna bet that when we have like the 100 research projects that come out of this tool eventually, it's gonna be if there's differences on maps between highlights. And Aquarium, and I'm gonna say probably occlusion venues in general, maybe less so on Tan, but Aquarium and Redwoods, the proxy that highlight is for like being high on the list is particularly dangerous. Because if you are hooked into the spy, that is kind of the way in which you win. Because there's a lot of wrong shots that can happen. There's a lot of missed progress that can happen. But getting the highlight on this map is going to be far more important than, say, probably Courtyard or Veranda or something like that.
Let me take a look at something just while I'm thinking of it here. So what's interesting is before this purloin goes, this purloin is simultaneously good for OP, but it might have been bad too. I really can't figure out which it is, because if you look right before the purloin is there, OP's been bumped back down to neutral, I think because we're getting bar highlights, actually. And at that point, he's still got bug, contact, half a flirt, and his inspects. So 229, right? 229. Purloin is about to come off. It hasn't yet. We don't have a highlight. We have bug, contact, half the flirt, half the inspects. We're 80% at that, 85% at that point. I think we haven't actually done too much of this, even though this is what it says on the tin. Let's talk about what he should have done here. What maybe switches the outcome of this match. At this point, Opie's 85%. I don't think he's a suspect for the bug. I think at this point, it probably, in retrospect, and it's easy to say in retrospect, his best move is to finish inspects, finish seduce, and forced the tough shot for the unseen bug in the Softail finish. And the tool seems to mostly agree. But the moment the purloin goes off, what does he do? He starts low-lighting people, and he starts highlighting people who could have done the purloin. And what's interesting is that the first person he highlights is Opie. He highlights a few people afterwards, just to be safe. He's not positive about who did the purloin. He's got narrowed down. But the lowlights come off about 15 seconds later. A few highlights come off, and then the very next thing that happens, just as he's finishing, look at this, as he's finishing the lowlights, the seduction target is heading towards the window. As he's finishing the lowlights, and right when he finishes his lowlights, one of his highlights walks up to this person and flirts, and he shoots him. It's a 2 flirt, and that's when he gets him. We were losing our minds about this at this point, because we knew it was the same thing as a bear. I said, can he shoot for a talk, is what I said. And then it wasn't even a talk, it was a window. Which is more suspicious in some ways.
I got something interesting for you.
Okay.
Slightly higher than average chance that someone you delegated to is your seduction target because you were already next to them.
Huh. I like it. Yeah. And I'll also say something like this too. Seduction targets make better frame targets for 2 reasons. One is that you probably have a better sense of how busy they've been. You've been watching them the whole game. You know if they've been around. You know if they've been easy to flirt with. If they've been hard to flirt with, the upside is they're probably more frameable. Also, you can manipulate them more. You can red flirt them. So, generally speaking, yes, seduction targets in a vacuum make better frame targets in a couple of ways.
Yeah, I'm really curious I don't know if that played into Yusha's thinking at all or if he was just shooting for potential progress, but I would love to know if, because we approached the person that took the purloin, if he has an outsized sense of that person being the seduction target, because, again, slightly higher than average chance that the person that you delegate to is going to be your flirt.
Yeah, I don't know. But I find it really interesting, the timing. As soon as he finishes up his Purloin highlights and lowlights, the very next thing he sees is the first one of those highlights going to Windows, probably the one he suspected the most anyway. But I think this is an example of just a little too much aggression. I think if Opie does the Softail finish, maybe he still loses. Yeesh was on fire that season as Sniper, as we can see. But, if you want to work backwards from results just a little bit, you say maybe the Purloin wasn't the move. Maybe the move there was the Softail finish. And insofar as you believe this win probability thing has any value at all, I think it tends to indicate that. Although I haven't checked the alternative. Let's see. If you go inspect instead of Purloin with a similar amount of time, and you're still neutral lit at that point, maybe. Yeah, I mean, your results go down certainly because of the second inspect, but they're still higher than 0. It's still about 55%, which is a little better than you were. So.
That, and the next thing that will come out to the tool is whether or not the shark is approaching. Because I also think that Yeesh feels like he might have to shoot now, because otherwise Opie's going to be behind the shark. And it's still in sync basically as the shot comes off, but he shoots right before the shark comes in and blocks, because Opie might have been able to turn around and make the rest of that countdown irrelevant.
Well, I haven't done it yet, but I do have a note to myself to explore trying to measure the shark timing, because it's a consistent time. And we know whether it starts at the bottom left or the top right from the replay, too. We know the variance. So, in theory, I could determine where the shark is at any point. The problem is we don't know which pad the spy has entered, so we don't know if they're in the center conversation, for example, rather than the left or the right. That is something that we might get someday. That's the next thing I want, frankly, is which pad the spy is on. But we could know, for example, whether or not the shark is coming across center, based on the data we already have.
It's funny, in theory I could track where the shark is at all times. Sounds like a line from Deep Blue Sea or something like that. Sounds like the first
right
person
you
that
get
does.
Eaten.
Yeah.
No, we know exactly where the shark is. Dead.
Right. So that is, and it's funny because also I was joking about trying to track where the shark is, but that's the great thing about talking to you technically minded people is I'll eventually I'll throw out outlandish, ridiculous ideas, and they're like, maybe it's possible.
I mean, that's honestly been the whole thing, is hey, I wonder if this will ever be possible. And then a few years later, it is. The future is now, guys. So what do you want to do next? Turnip Boy Pofke, something like that?
Let's see. So out of the ones I want to make sure to hit.
Yeah. Let's, in case we run out of time, let's do the ones you want to do the most. We've done a lot of them already, though.
I really like Turnip Boy Veranda. Let's at least do that one. So Turnip Boy versus Pofke on Veranda.
All right.
I'm trying to. I will probably remember why I liked this one so much, but I remember it sticking out to me, as well as some there being interesting stats, I think, from it. So let me put Turnip Boy as spy.
The first event is 330, a fingerprint. And this is very typical. I used to spar with Turnip Boy, and one thing that always got me is he really would just burn the first minute of a game all the time. I just could not get creative with the lowlights based on idling or inactivity or anything, because he was so good at making steady progress late and so willing to burn time to burn me.
Yeah, so let's see. So we have let's do a quick check-in on that fingerprint, just because I'm curious. So I guess I could do this one also, unless you have it up.
Sure.
Fingerprint.
I have it up.
Partials.
329, right?
Yeah.
One print. And does he have any what kind of flirt has he got here?
Let's just say 34%.
Okay. Oh, you want to put it in that range?
Yeah, just put it at 34. Let's say that we've gotten a relatively. It's as if it was a good white.
Okay, one fingerprint. As a neutral light, he's only gone up a few points. It's only 41%, but remember, the starting number for this is high 30s. So he's gone up a few points because he's burned a fair bit of time. He's gotten one good flirt, and he's gotten one fingerprint. So he's only improved slightly at this point. Again, that early fingerprint, it does not seem to have helped much. I think it's just too much suspicion, and it's just not that useful. It's nice. I think it's good for planning purposes, but by itself, the tool is pretty unimpressed by that first fingerprint. In these 5 of 8s, maybe in a 4 of 8, we'd see different results. Keep in mind, we've checked this twice now. It's been on Veranda both times. Because it's not your 4th mission, potentially, it's not your final mission, so to speak, we might see very different results for a first fingerprint on a courtyard or a ballroom.
All right, so let's. I want to see this. This bug gets us anything for not.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that's going to get confused here, and I don't know even from the replay. It looks like we pick up a highlight for the statue, not for the bug. But let's just call it.
Right?
Let's just call it a free bug. So
Let's call it a free bug.
So don't 97% is going to ID this game. So let's go with like 83%. 83% flirt, partial inspects, partial fingerprint, bug, neutral light. Oh, actually, no inspect.
No inspects. Yeah. So with no inspects, about 250-ish, it only has 10 games matching, but the spy wins 9 of them. So if you've gotten most of the seduce done, if you've got a fingerprint already, you're not highlight, and you've already got the bug on veranda, it's basically saying at that point you have enough softel progress and you have the one free hardtail. That's like you got away with the hardtail on a 4-mission variant. They're basically, so that's the whole thing about the 5s, right? Is I said fingerprint is not your actually completing mission in addition to the softels. If you get away with bug on ballroom, if you spot someone bug on ballroom, you're usually going to win, right? That's just the way it is, because they can softel their way to victory. If you spot someone bug on veranda, you're still going to lose a lot against a good sniper. They still can get you on one of the other ones. So I guess the tool is saying, with bug here and this much softel progress early on, that's like getting away with the hardtail on a 4-mission setup.
That's a great reference point. What happens to our win percent when we make the trade off of inspect but highlight?
So I'm going to guess it goes down a lot. So partial inspects and highlight, and it's what, just a few seconds later? It looks like 245.
Yeah.
More about. Yeah, then it's down. We only have a couple matching games at that point, but it's a coin flip.
Oh, right. It's gonna dive down. So
it's too specific at this point, but it'll actually get better again as we get a little further into the game, because it's just this little island in the middle of the game. So, for example, actually the highlight comes at 237. Yeah, that actually increases it. Okay, so if you go a little after the inspect, so we get more towards like the middle of the game, it's actually quite different. At that point, the count goes back up, and it's only 6 games total, 16%. So 1 out of 6 at this point, with about 2 minutes left.
Okay, so let's check in again before we go in for the final inspect fingerprint. So we're at, let's say, 50 seconds. 50 seconds, bug, contact, seduce, partials on inspect and fingerprint.
Partials on fingerprint, partials on inspect, and we are still a highlight.
Still highlight.
At this point, we have a lot of games that match. We have 33 games that match this. And guess what? We're almost exactly back to where we started. We're at 39% at this point.
Interesting. That's interesting. So I think that there's a couple things happening here, and one is that we're in a unique game where we can finish both in one go. So, or at least that we see, right? Because it sees 2 partial progress. I would guess that if somehow we're able to localize the games into you can go finish inspect and fingerprint at the same thing, it's going to go up a bit. I still don't think it's going to be a huge advantage because visiting second statue. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing here. Like, you have the highlight, and again, the tool responds very strongly to these lights, I've noticed. And even though for certain snipers that's meaningless, certain snipers it just doesn't matter at all. They don't use them that way, or for some it matters a lot. And in aggregate, it matters a lot. Most snipers, most of the time, it matters a lot for a lot of different reasons. But at this point, it feels like we've given away. So I mentioned earlier, you get away with the bug you still haven't won because it's a 5-8 variant. But you had so much softel progress. But we've jumped forward quite a bit of time, and we don't have much more softel progress. We've kind of lost those 2 minutes. And those 2 minutes are the difference between you're way ahead for a 5-mission setup, and you're actually only slightly better than when you started, because all that time wasted, and all we did was finish the seduce that was most of the way there, and we traded some inspects for a highlight, which is a net negative. So we're in pretty rough shape again here, potentially. We're just a little under 40%. And I think getting under a minute with no shot coming off, it gets rid of all the jumpy shots, it gets rid of all the good frames, it gets rid of all the rushes. This is what we're left with. It really is dangerous to be in that last minute without being very close to finishing.
Indeed. And so the big telling moment for Pofke is that Pofke is looking for swap, which basically means there's not going to be a shot coming off, or at least we're deeply uncomfortable with taking that shot. Yes. But I think that's really, it's fascinating to think that, so when we looked at the win percentage earlier, it did include the games where even if you do nothing, you don't have a 0% chance of winning, but it goes down substantially. But that some of the biggest things you can burn away are maybe not trying to execute a rush on veranda. I'm actually just, I'm curious, sometime I just might run things where I just look at over time on veranda with varying amounts of progress, just like medium progress, rush versus no rush. Like the game is just later, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that, and on certain venues, literally just hanging around increases, your win percentage, because it burns off the things people get caught for, and it's hard not to shoot a sieve on some of these. So,
I forgot to set up this game real quick. So, also this game is Turnip Boy has 4 games left. He's down 3, I want to say.
Right.
So this is huge. So narratively, we've kind of like dissected this, and that's going to happen a lot when we do Slowcast, but also specifically we're looking at stats. We're
He
kind of
really needed this.
Right, he really, really, really badly needed this because he's down 3 games. He has to win 3 of the last 4 games on Ballroom and Veranda first. And he has to win all 4 in order to outright win. He needs 3 to tie. So this is basically the biggest test for him, whether or not he's going to have to just sweep the remaining venues just in order to tie. And basically the chance to win outright goes away with this game. And a lot of the time I feel like he's going to feel like this is the biggest hurdle, is getting the spy win on Veranda. And he's able to take it away. So it was an extremely important moment in the match. And no spoilers, because they're not spoilers because they're in the article, he wins.
The article's now canon, yeah. And so the ambassador, by the way, has gone to that statue. I was talking about how the odds there say it's about 39%. And again, caveat, we're still figuring this out, but it's just a starting point for discussion. You could argue at that point that he's in pretty bad shape unless the ambassador puts their hands on a statue that he hasn't already inspected, and that's the one thing that allows him to finish in one go, to finish with under a minute left, to do 2 soft tells at once. Whereas if he has to go do that and then go get a fingerprint at a bookshelf nearby, that might be just a little too much for Pofke. So I think Turnip Boy probably was in pretty significant trouble there, and then the ambassador did the one thing they needed, and it got him the win he needed. And he noticed, so good for him.
Indeed. And I think that it's also, it's one of those maps where the waiting for the swap for confirmation is so tempting as Sniper that they might just wait a little bit too long and be a little bit less aggressive than they need to be, because they're trying to make themselves be really patient on Veranda, which normally I would highly suggest, but does basically the bug is the ending of the story, because I think Pofke probably has a perfect mission count on Turnip Boy, except the bug, and is just it thinks that he's going in for a triple mission, perhaps. But anyway, that actually might be a future tool, is looking at chances of winning a set based historically on how behind you are. Like, how many times have we had upsets with someone being down 3 games with
that wouldn't even be hard. I'm writing that down right now,
because that one actually, like, I mean, obviously there'd be all these iterations of the baseline stuff, but then there's also like the remaining map is Veranda or something like that.
Yeah, that would be the only part that would be tricky potentially. You wouldn't have to worry about that in aggregate, but for specifics it would matter. So there's 2 more I definitely want to hit, even though I think they're both going to be pretty quick, because there's like a discrete thing I want to look at in each. It's the KCM Kaylee Modern game, and the Obi Wrights Durand Courtyard game from Winter Cup. That's the most recent, and actually was the match that was kind of the impetus for the essay in the first place, because I thought that's one of the best matches I've ever seen. And then I thought, what are some of the other ones? And within an hour, I had a draft.
All right, so Crazy Kaylee versus... Let me look up the things. So Crazy Kaylee versus KCM on Modern?
Yeah, and what's interesting is Modern was 5'8" at the time, and really there's not a whole lot to look at here. We've probably all seen this. From my mind, it's one of the best spy games ever played for any number of reasons. For one thing, it's the last game in the match. KCM's already down 6-5. If he wins here, he gets a point. If he doesn't, he gets absolutely nothing. And it's against a sniper who's obviously excellent. And it's on a venue that snipers, particularly excellent snipers, were just dominating at the time. Modern was 5'8" at the time. We've changed it to 4'8", and it's definitely much better now. But elite snipers were just killing you on this venue, just repeatedly. So getting a spy win against this sniper in this context was just absolutely ridiculous. And you can see, if you look at the end of this game, he still only got 3 missions done with, 2 seconds left, 3 seconds left, technically. Which is ridiculous. And
we start with a beautiful bug. So one of the problems also that we're going to have with the data set on this one in particular is that there's going to be a sample shift of 4 of 8 and 5 of 8. So it's going to be a little bit tricky for Modern and the data to be as clean, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it means in this case we have to do 5'8" and not Modern. We can't do a specific venue. And generally speaking, I do mission variants more than venues because we need a better data set. And again, play more games, guys. This is only going to get better as you do. But there are only 3 Modern games that, or 5 of 8 games rather, that even match the situation he's in here with 3 seconds left. That even match. And he's the only one to win out of them, unsurprisingly. Because what he does here is, you can see as he's walking towards a selection target, let's try that instead. Let's put the seduce way down. So it's 35 seconds instead. and the seduce is only at 34% because he needs 2 more flirts at this point. And that is really rough. There are more matches for that. If we match this way, 35 seconds left, there are 19 matching games at this point. So this is not a particularly weird situation for these 5/8s to be in, as you've gotten a couple of hardtails done, you're through the contact, but you haven't done inspect, you haven't finished your seduce, a couple dozen games basically. And the spy's in pretty good shape here at this point. Just not against Crazy Kaylee for that matter. But we know he's in big trouble because he needs 2 more flirts. He's not going to inspect swap. But what he does is he flirts with his seduction target. And remember, you said earlier you can delegate to your seduction target because you're already next to them. That's exactly what he does. Flirts, delegates to them. The timer runs out as they're walking both to the thing. He flirts a second time as they take the list. And it is both missions done with 3 seconds left and 8+ seconds of overtime. And somehow no shot comes off. It's jaw-dropping. It really is.
Yeah, and like we see screen shakes. Kaylee does not usually screen shake. Not only because normally he's not frustrated like this.
He's like, this doesn't make sense. Nobody's finishing. And
right.
He's totally right.
And this was not like people, because sometimes people now kind of communicate with the future casters by screen shaking for kind of stuff. This is actual legitimate frustration and like just I have no idea what's going on.
Whoa. Yeah, you can hear the whoa.
Exactly. Like, and the thing is, Kaylee's actually excellent at parsing endgame situations where he's like, who could possibly be done? And so now he's looking, right? He's looking for, okay, do I really think that Pearls and Irish probably, like, are they possibly done? It looks like he might even think about shooting Ryan and Disney, but he decides not to, but he's in motion. He's like, that would be his top suspect. If he was in a conversation talking, probably he just gets shot. But he's like, no, impossible. And he holds back from it. And then he starts rotating his camera over to Queen. And honestly, if he had just taken the shot, because I think he was going to shoot Queen.
Just because there was someone in front of him and you might as well shoot someone. That's what I thought was going to happen on stream. I thought, oh no, he actually doesn't know who it is, but Queen's just standing there and someone's got to get shot and it's been so long, it's going to happen by default. And I felt bad. I felt bad for KCM because I felt like he was just standing in the wrong place, even though he'd gotten away with it. But at that point, and this is the one downside, Kaylee's game is brittle. He said it himself. He relies on having perfect information or nearly so. And so when he doesn't, the decision-making process breaks down a little bit, and we're seeing that here. We don't see it too often, though. And you're right. So you mentioned earlier that he's pretty good at like inferring who could be done. 3 games before this, in the exact same match, was that balcony game where KCM got away with the Twitch bug, also mentioned in the essay. And Kaylee does not see the bug, but figures since nobody other than the ambassador was talking late, it had to be the person next to the ambassador and shoots someone for a bug he didn't see. So it's the exact same kind of thing that you were talking about. But in this case, it's just there were too many assumptions, and it really didn't look like Queen was finishing. I think you're right about Disney. The most sensible thing for him to assume is that he forgot a fingerprint on blue, right? That's what you're thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. And it also makes sense because that is something that Kaylee knows happens to him on these larger venues. He's said so. And we've seen it too, actually. Bacon drew him, and I think it was a Season 4 match on Library, with a spy win on Library as Green Dress, I remember off the top of my head, actually. Got away with a good bug and got a fingerprint off Center Statue on Library, and Kaylee said afterwards, I just forgot the fingerprint was there. He can't quite track the fingerprints reliably on these large venues where there's a bunch of bookcases and a bunch of statues. That's the distinction. So it is very plausible in particular that he would miss a fingerprint on Modern 5/8. So that would have been a very sensible shot on his part. And I'm still surprised to this day that it didn't come off.
Yeah. No, and I think that's because I think Kaylee would often start pre-processing who could be done, right?
Before the beeps. Yeah,
before the beeps.
You have to.
And because also maybe he's worried about also Disney bugging on his way through Ambassador with like a few seconds left. But the thing is, the countdown starts going, but it's long enough that it can't be Ryan. Like he almost shoots, but then I think he's too late for even what would be a bug finish. And he's like, no, it's got to be someone else.
Yeah. I think fingerprint on blue still makes the most sense. I probably would have shot for it. I would have just assumed I missed it. And again, this is like the one thing that Kaylee knows about himself is that even though he tracks things very, very well, probably better than anyone, nobody in the world, Kaylee included, is quite good enough to reliably track fingerprints on large venues. So still surprised the shot didn't come off. I think KCM wins this game either way. I'm just really surprised it happened with a mission win rather than a Civ shot on Disney.
Indeed. Okay, you said you had one specific other game that you'd like to jump into.
Oh, yeah, let's do Opie Urand in case we have to wrap up soon. That's the most recent one. This happened just a month and a half ago, I think. And Boy, this is a really big one. I'm going to bring up the match itself here to make sure I have the full context, because the context is a big part of this one. So at this point, we know that he was down 12-9 in this match at one point. More to the point, he was down 13-8, which meant he had to win the last 5 games. Now, he won the very first one after that. It was a balcony game. So heading into this courtyard game, Opie is down 13-9, and he has to win the last 4 games. The last 4 games are 2 on courtyard and 2 on Taean. Both Taean games are winnable, right? You can win your spy game on Taean. That's not that crazy. And not just because it's Taean, but Urand actually in particular does not like Taean. I know for a fact. So, and not a lot of snipers do, to be fair, right? But Urand often avoids Taean, doesn't like it much, has said so publicly. And you figure the courtyard game, he's very likely to beat Urand there too. So, with 4 games left that he needs to win in a row just to force overtime in the finals, this is actually the most important one right away, is Opie's spy game on courtyard. This is the one statistically he's far and away most likely to lose.
Okay, so let me see right here. There's something weird going on with my computer.
Yeah. Now this is interesting. The things I want to check, I'll just start talking about it. That's okay. So I'm looking at 3 minutes here, and Opie is going for an early inspect. He has no flirt. It's very unusual for Opie not to get that aggressive early flirt in. In fact, against Urand specifically in this set, he was constantly abusing that. He was going off, flirting, stop talking or leaving immediately, and then going right back in. And Urand was doing it to him too, and they were not catching each other on it, just at all.
Okay, it's all fixed. It was just, it looked like there's a black bar at the bottom of my screen, but it's just because Courtyard has these edges that look completely black. And I thought
Got it. Yes.
Okay, so where were we at? You were the...
3 minutes. He's going for the inspects. And the starting percentage here for these 4 mission variants is about 45%, right? So that hasn't changed, even though he's wasted the first 30 seconds. Doesn't really matter at all. But then I'm going to give him inspects. Let's see, we're going to go forward just a little bit. I'm going to give him inspects and a highlight at, about 3 minutes. If you give him nothing, he's just burned 30 seconds. He's still about 45%. Doesn't really matter. But if I give him inspects and a highlight, let's give him inspects without a highlight. Inspects without a highlight, he jumps up to 53%. Inspects with a highlight, down 38%. And that matches almost 400 games. So this is a very common scenario. Is in the first 30 seconds, a spy goes to statues and gets a highlight. The data says that is, in aggregate, not a good idea. You lose 7% of your win percentage just by doing that, just by the early statues, just by picking up the early highlight.
Yeah, and so it's basic, because that's one of the things the tool will be really useful for analyzing is openers, because as you progress, the sample size gets further down because you've become like more intensely attached to this very specific file. But opener, as in seduceless first visit statue, that's a common opener, right? And it seems like it's a little bit worse than just doing nothing, which is funny.
Yeah. Now, to be fair to anyone who has had this notion that maybe they should do it, it's probably very idiosyncratic. But in aggregate, the early highlight is not worth the early inspect progress. And by the way, I want to point out, since this is related to what I just said, in that modern KCM game, it was just like the veranda game. He got to the end without being a highlight because he didn't go to statues. He did all that stuff without being a highlight, and that's one of the reasons it worked. So, but anyway, we jump forward now a little bit. Let's see. Opie doesn't do anything again until, and this is the thing I really wanted to pick this game for, apart from just the stakes, right? He gets a fingerprint at 244, but it's a difficult.
Okay. So we got basically 34%. So one mediocre flirt, and inspect difficult fingerprint. What are we at?
Right. So if I give him just a normal fingerprint at this point, he plummets to 26%. If I give him one difficult fingerprint, there are only 3 matches, but the spies win 2 of them. So we've seen this twice now. A fingerprint early on hurts your chances. A difficult fingerprint early on really helps them. The difference between that first fingerprint being difficult or not, in sometimes a small sample size, but sometimes in a decent one, seems to be very big. We all would have grasped intuitively that it was important, but the data so far are telling us that it's even more important maybe than we guessed.
Yeah, let's jump to just before. Let's give ourselves see if you can get more games if you jump to 227 right before we do our next mission, because maybe more will get collected in there.
Only one more game. It only gets us to 4 at that point. Okay. But the contact might actually help because a lot of people get contact on in the first minute. So I'm going to give it contact at 226. No, still very few games. So it's interesting. What I'm really seeing here is that the early difficult fingerprint and the early statues is a very uncommon combo on Courtyard. Very.
Gotcha. So let's. I imagine that. Let's. Do you want to just go to the fingerprint complete at 56
sure.
seconds and bump the seduction down to 83%? So
Okay.
contact, inspect, seduction 83, fingerprint done, 56 seconds left.
Contact, inspect, fingerprint done. One of them's difficult, and that doesn't matter when it's completed too.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's difficult. So Area 57. So at this point, still a highlight, and at that point we have 8 games that match, and the Spy has won 7 of them. So this is a very good position to be in.
Awesome. So let's see if what I guess what decision making. So we were able to get into the fingerprint, which was probably the biggest thing. Obviously,
Yes.
we risked not getting the fingerprint, although OP does have an excellent AT rate.
Yeah, about 60%, that's one of the transformative things about this, is that it makes it so that you want to go for difficult fingerprints. And when you see how high this percentage is here, when you've got fingerprint done and one of your fingerprints is difficult, I think what we're really seeing is that difficult fingerprints are even more valuable than we would have suspected.
Especially on a map like on Courtyard, because one of the interesting things for me is it also indicates that spies might just need to go for an early difficult first. Maybe they always go for the easy, the guaranteed fingerprint, when honestly it should be the other way around, just in like a decision tree thing.
I have felt that way a lot, and one thing I've also said, and this makes intuitive sense, it's not going to show up in the numbers, but if you go for the difficult first, you know whether or not you've got it. It's early enough in the game that you can say, maybe now I don't do fingerprints if I don't hit it, and if you do hit it, then you do. But these are all things that were intuitive. We're not learning something new from this. Difficult fingerprints are really good. What we're learning, I think, insofar as you want to say this means anything at all, and if you want to be skeptical about its influence, that's fine. But if the data tells us anything here, it's that difficult fingerprints are even better than we thought.
Mm-hmm. As far as like distinguishing like the outcomes of games, and now it actually has a specific kind of number, because whenever we've talked about things like that, it's always really hard to put a number on it. We kind of intuitively, we can kind of make guesses at other like easy to parse missions, like in specs, where it's just like they have guaranteed known obvious mission progress or something like that.
Right.
But also a lot of snipers, and it might be over represented in lower parts of the data, might just straight up not remember where difficults are. They remember the first fingerprint and then they give up on the next one.
Yes, and I think they're more likely to remember difficults if they've already noticed you specifically for getting a non-difficult print. And if they then see you, let's say you're standing near the ambassador after that, and the ambassador takes a drink next to you, and they know you have a print, and someone else takes a drink before you, they're way more likely to notice that difficult than they would the difficult at the beginning of the game. I also think, and this is just theory on my part, I think one of the things is that when the first print is difficult, not only do you get to do that either or thing that I mentioned, I'll finish fingerprints if I hit this, I might not if I don't, right? Not only that, I think if you hit the difficult early on, you're almost definitely going to try to finish fingerprints. And when you definitely try to finish fingerprints, I think it has the effect of focusing your mind. You have no choice paralysis. You start thinking, how do I achieve this specific end? You start watching fingerprints closely because now you know you're ahead of the curve a little bit, and you probably plan your game out better. So I think you're more likely to make sure you cash in by finishing fingerprint period, and you're more likely to play the kind of conscientious, like planned out, paced, KCM style kind of pacing that you might have trouble doing otherwise. I think the difficult fingerprint does all that. It forces you to think about the game in a better way, in addition to just the obvious aspect of getting away with something.
That, and it's obscured from the sniper, where if there's a game where there's just a ton of people piled up at bar, sniper is going to put more attention onto Purloin, where the sniper has no idea if you hit that difficult fingerprint or not. So it's not like the sniper's going to be more sensitive to, this person's going to do a fingerprint game because they've hit this.
Right. The only time they could be more sensitive to it is if this, the ambassador seems to be touching a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And, there's not usually a huge variance in the number of things the ambassador touches.
Yeah. But so then eventually, OP. So where were we at with 55 seconds left, one flirt left, inspect fingerprint contact?
Yeah, it's 8 only matches 8 games, but the spy won all but one of them, 7 for 8 at that point. So what we're seeing is if basically it's at this point flirt is almost a foregone conclusion. You're through the crucibles of contact and inspect. Those are the two we always talk about, right? You're through those already, and you've got a difficult fingerprint as one of your fingerprints done. at that point, you really have just basically gotten away with it.
Right. And at that point, the game that the sniper lost honestly might just be a shot on the fingerprint or contact or something, not even waiting for seduce. It could be that in this position, they've always won if they only just have the seduction left, and it was really the one game was a shot just after.
I agree. Well, I'm satisfied. I think we did a pretty good job here, actually. What do you think?
I will never be satisfied. Let's be clear about using this tool. I think it's so fascinating. I guess how much time? Like no time for more games. But is there anything else you'd like to address with the tool? Do you want to take any specific questions?
Well, if anyone throw any quick questions out just in the next minute or two, I can still answer them, sure. But I will, for anyone who came in late, I'll just summarize. What we have is a very rough win probability tool, kind of like the ones you'll see for Major League Baseball or the National Football League, where you'll take a general game state and see whether or not the spies in those games that match that game state went on to win or not. So, you get bug done in the first minute and contact done in the first minute, and you're not a highlight. How often do spies win in that general scenario? There are still some assumptions. Obviously, we can't match it down to the second, and we wouldn't want to because there wouldn't be enough matches. But we say anything within 10 or 20 seconds on either direction. We do track things like difficult fingerprints and flirt percentage. There's a lot of decisions still to be made. Should it be 20 seconds on either side, for example? Should it be 10? Should it be 15? Should we go by a specific venue? Should we go by all 4 mission variants? Should we, all that stuff. We'll also probably have versions about whether or not they're just going to reach countdown or whether or not they're going to win. There are so many choices to make, and I'm going to ask the community over time, of course, to help me with this, to eyeball it. We're going to have to figure this out kind of as we go, and we're going to have to iterate on it. And most of all, though, we just need more competitive events and more data to use this on, because the number one problem we run into, as you've alluded to a few times, is we put all the criteria in and 7 or 8 games match, which is something, right? It's not nothing. But if we have anything less than a few dozen, the sample size is a little small and it's a little hard to be confident in the conclusions we draw.
All right. Do we have any... Oh, yeah. It's true that it'd be funny if we could link this up with a salty bets kind of thing, where it actually like sets the odds at something.
Yeah.
There's so much.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we are going to try to do a lot with this, but I want people to be very patient. I know they're like, hey, when can I use this? When can I play with it? When can you add things? Free will is over. Oh, God. So we are... So that's going to take a little bit of time, right? I don't want to put this out into the world and have it spitting out these numbers that we're not confident about, right? These are general starting points. These are general ranges. And I am pretty confident about that. I am pretty confident that when it says we went from 60% to 30% with, whether or not a fingerprint is difficult or not, I'm confident that even with a small sample size, that is a significant difference. How significant? I don't know. Maybe the significance is 10, maybe it's 40%. But I'm confident in the general ranges. I think that's where this is a good starting point for discussion and further analysis. But most of all, we just need more games, and we need to tweak it and iterate on it. And I know a lot of you are anxious to get your hands on it and help, and you will absolutely have an opportunity to at some point this year.
Yeah, and I think that one of the most important things just to me as a particular member of the community is being able to test intuitions against something. Just not absolutely grasping at nothing. I think there's a lot of qualifications, but previously, I don't think you will be able to find exceptions to the tool. Like, don't worry, if you are in a situation, you can argue with the situation saying, but I bet I could do this, that there's something else about this sniper. There will always be those kind of exceptions.
And I don't want people to cite this like it's a fact. Oh, but the tool says this, so it's settled. It's definitely not. That's definitely not the true. Not true.
Exactly. And there will never be a full stockfish style tool that we know of for SpyParty that's going to be able to give the sort of like hard advantage situations, especially because there's just so much to parse in this. But it's just exciting because this is something that when we were thinking about what we could do with data in SpyParty and if something would be too much, we have gone so far beyond what we were worried about. But even then, honestly, I don't feel like this would, even if it was worked very well, don't think it would break the game.
No, because people can react to it. Because all it does is tell people, well, watch for this more, in which case we have the same kind of counterplay that we mentioned before. What I compare this to is Bayesian priors. I'm guessing in this crowd, a lot of people already know what that is, but I'll describe it very briefly. So it is very common to have data on something and to say, I want data, I want empiricism, right, whenever you can have it. And that's a good posture when you have a lot of data about something, potentially. But sometimes you don't have a lot of data about something, too. And people make the mistake, I think, of doing what I call scientism, which is, well, because I generally prefer to have a lot of data, I'm going to take whatever has the most data and say that's the factual empirical thing. But it's possible for something to have the most data and still not have enough data to make a good decision with, right? In fact, I'd say most things are like that. Most of the time, we don't have enough data on something that we should be confident about a conclusion. And just picking the thing with the most data is not actually being data-centered. Being data-centered means being skeptical about the amount of data you have, too. One of the ways you compensate for that is what's called a Bayesian prior, which is that you start with just a guess, because the guess incorporates all the things we can't measure and all the things we don't have data on, your intuition, right? All the subconscious stuff. I'm not a hippie, I swear to God, but I think there's something to that. I think there's a lot to intuition, there's a lot we can't measure, and I think our first blush guesses, I think people are actually pretty good at this stuff. And when you go for just hard data, you lose some of that. So how do you meld those two things without turning it into just a guessing game, right? How do you stay close to the data, don't over rely on the data, and don't turn it into a bunch of crap where you're just going with your gut, right? The old baseball scout thing. Well, the way you do that is you use your intuition to produce a starting guess, a prior. Here's what I think is true, and here's roughly the probability I would put on it. Then you augment that guess with the data. So you kind of, in theory, get the best of both worlds. That's what I want this to be. Like you're saying, you like it. You said you wanted to have something to compare your guesses to. That's what I think of here. I think this is kind of like a Bayesian prior, which is you're going to have your guess, and then you compare it to this, and this should not replace your intuition. This should tweak it. So if your intuition is the difficult fingerprints don't matter that much, and this tells you they matter incredibly importantly, you meet it in the middle and say, okay, they matter moderately more than I thought, right? You sort of synthesize the two. That's where I think we should start with this thing. And I think as data increases over time, maybe a little less on the priors and a little more on the tool. But for now, it's just something you synthesize with your intuition and you augment them with each other.
Totally agreed with all of that, especially on, we'll do a Slowcast eventually of why logical positivism as a tradition died out in the 20th century, and yet still people hold on to it because, like you're saying, that they only believe things with the most empirical data, but that science as a process is not something empirically provable, so logical positivism died out because it couldn't prove that science was a verifiable thing. So back came metaphysics, and that's what that's
you know
what
I really want to clip together just the very beginning of this cast and the end, and it's like one of those Facebook threads where they collapse all the comments in between, and by the end it's a completely different argument. That's where we've ended up, guys. We ended up on physical determinism, I think.
Yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to well, what was I going to say? Well, I had something cool to say. Then I
have the same problem. If we don't write them down, we just lose them, right?
Yeah, but I think it's a really, really cool thing that we're going to start opening up. And the other great thing is about it is after it's tweaked, and I should be clear, not by me. I did no work on this tool except for just get to test fun things with it and then see if it passes smell tests, one like that. But as you iterate on it and eventually it's released out, it gives the ability for like research projects in SpyParty, yes. Which again, we do need more. We do need more games out there in different states, but that we can really start testing differences. Oh, right. I remember the thing I was going to say is if, for me, the analogy is sort of like before when we were thinking about win rates in games, it was almost like forecasting presidential elections based on popular vote, where it's something, but as people know, it's not deterministic. And this is basically like the most rudimentary state model, where at least we have understood and we're having probabilities where state-based polls are now kind of included, where we are much closer. We have some sort of data, but we haven't had things like how far away from the election, the swinginess of state, poll accuracy, that kind of thing. So
we have the data to start that process now.
Right. We've at least gotten something where we're one step towards it, where this is a model based not on just one number, but just the most basic context, which is already, to me, a lot better than what we had before.
Yes, totally right. And there are some people in this community who are just so much better at this than me. I am not a computer science genius or expert. Uh, maybe for the general populace, I'm pretty good at this, but in this community, I'm an absolute troglodyte. And my whole contribution is the grunt work and the ideas, and just wouldn't it be cool if, and just absolutely tireless once I come up with an idea I can't get rid of, and then I put it out there, and I think people are going to do some really cool stuff with it once I get it out there, and I can't wait to see what they come up with, because as you say, there's a lot of potential there.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to kind of call it. I do want to call attention one more time to this is kind of a blended cast because it was one celebrating the release of the article on the greatest matches. Go check out that article and just watch some of those casts. We did get into some spoilers here, obviously, but honestly, like when we were doing research for this and I was going back through them, I got caught up on them all over again. They are incredible. The casting is amazing, and they are some of the best that SpyParty has to offer. This, to me, is now one of the first things that I would give to a player that's trying to ask about SpyParty if they really want to jump into and wonder if it's a competitive game or not. The fact that we have a list that is this robust and we still left a bunch of things out, like you're mentioning the honorable mentions. This community's competitive scene is insane for the size, and our production is insane. The quality of matches really shines through on this. So one, congratulations on the article. Congratulations to the community for producing such wonderful games. And then we've really gotten a chance to start looking at using these matches, poking into the future with this tool.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are very kind words. And yes, the community in particular made my job on this really easy. All I had to do was watch it for a bunch of years and then just write down what I remember. And obviously, the hard part was playing the matches and producing all this stuff. So, my thanks to everyone for all the wonderful feedback. And there's more coming on all fronts. And thank you again for hosting today and doing such a good job.
Awesome. Okay, well, I don't know if there's anything else to plug. I mean, there's just so much going on right now. The Hexagon Cup is going on.
Oh, there is one thing. Yeah.
Oh.
So Adele's has already mentioned this, but we are doing another April Fool's cast. For those who remember last year, we did something called procedurally generated casting, which is exactly as absurd as it sounds. And we're going to do something like that again on April 1st. I think we're looking at 6 p.m. Eastern, which will means some of the European people will still be awake, hopefully. So, but you'll be able to see the VOD the next day. We're going to do procedurally generated casting again, and a second casting event, which I'm not sure we're revealing just yet, but we'll see if it works. So there's going to be some real silliness on April 1st, courtesy of Dell's. I will participate, a few others as well. More details soon, but April 1st, April Fool's Cast, you're definitely going to want to see it. It will be hilarious.
Right. Similar to how eventually this tool will replace analysis, the procedurally generated casting will replace casting, and then we will have finally the automated, well, eventually the 24007 channel will just be random replays being put in there, and then just everything's generated, and we don't have to make content anymore.
I mean, let's be honest, the whole idea here, the whole point of the game is that eventually it's all AIs.
Right. We were always trying to find the last human and then slowly eliminate them from the process, and then eventually we just left with that party.
Sorry to disappoint you all. You're all part of a horrible, horrible research project, and it's almost over.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. Looking forward to the April Fool's cast and all the competitive things going on. Congratulations again on the article, and I can't wait for part 2 in like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it probably will take a while. Hopefully a couple weeks in all seriousness, but we'll see.
All right. Well, thanks so much, and we're going to head out. Bye.